9 mysterious archaeological discoveries made recently that even top scientists can't explain. Hello, and welcome to the Ancient History Channel. Dear viewers, our world is like a massive history book, but the fascinating thing is that many of its pages are still sealed shut. Every year, archaeologists uncover new pieces of the past, and sometimes those very discoveries leave the scientific community scratching their heads in confusion. That's because some of the things found beneath the ground simply don't match what we once believed about human history. Just imagine this for a moment. Deep within a dense forest that has been forgotten for thousands of years, people suddenly discover an enormous ancient city. Or in another place, archaeologists uncover a grave with such a strange burial method that it almost looks as if someone was trying to seal away a mysterious creature. There are even skeletons buried alongside weapons, treasures, or architectural structures whose original purpose scientists still don't fully understand today. What makes all of this even more fascinating is this. The more we discover, the more we realize that human history is far more complex and far more mysterious than what has ever been written in textbooks. Many recent archaeological discoveries have not only changed the way we view ancient civilizations, but they have also raised questions that even the world's leading scientists cannot answer with certainty. So what exactly are these mysteries? Which strange tombs, lost cities, or ancient artifacts are puzzling archaeologists today? And how many secrets might still be hidden beneath the surface of our planet, waiting to be revealed? Today we're going to explore some of the most mysterious archaeological discoveries from recent years. Stories that, the deeper you dive into them, the more you'll realize that real history can be even more thrilling than the movies. Are you ready? If you are, then let's begin with the very first discovery. The 2,100-year-old panda skeleton found in the tomb of a Chinese emperor. If one day you stepped into an ancient tomb that once belonged to a powerful emperor more than 2,000 years ago, what would you expect to find first? Human remains? Gold and silver? Precious jewels? Or rare royal artifacts? Yes, those are exactly the kinds of things we normally imagine discovering in an ancient tomb. But during a recent excavation, Chinese archaeologists revealed something that surprised many people. They announced the discovery of a giant panda skeleton dating back about 2,100 years. This skeleton was not randomly buried underground. It had been carefully placed inside a brick structure and positioned facing the resting place of Emperor Wen of Han, the well-known ruler of the Han dynasty, near the city of Xi'an in Shanxi province, China. This detail immediately raised a fascinating question among researchers. Why would a panda be placed so ceremoniously within a royal burial complex? To find the answer, a research team led by the Chinese Academy of Archaeology conducted a careful analysis of the skeleton. According to the experts, this was not an ordinary panda. Instead, it belonged to the Qinling panda, a very rare subspecies native to the Qinling Mountains, a mountain range often considered the natural boundary separating northern and southern China. Unlike the familiar black and white pandas most of us recognize, Qinling pandas have brown and white fur. Scientists believe this difference developed because of geographic isolation over thousands of years, which led them to evolve unique physical and genetic traits compared with the giant pandas living in Sichuan province. But the story becomes even more intriguing. Archaeologists discovered that this was not the first time the remains of this special panda had appeared in royal tombs. Earlier, a similar panda skeleton had been found in the tomb of Empress Dowager Bo, who was also the mother of Emperor Wen of Han. So what might this mean? In ancient Chinese history, pandas were not simply wild animals. They were regarded as noble creatures, symbols of rarity and power. Because of this, pandas were sometimes presented as tribute to the imperial family or given as gifts to foreign envoys to express respect and strengthen diplomatic relationships. For that reason, the presence of a panda skeleton in this royal tomb was likely not a coincidence. It may have been part of a royal burial ritual or a symbolic offering meant to accompany the deceased emperor. And that's not all. During the excavation, scientists also discovered the remains of many other rare animals, including tigers, tapirs, water buffalo, horned antelopes, gorals, and even yaks. All of these findings led experts to propose an intriguing theory. It appears that the ancient builders may have been trying to recreate a kind of imperial garden for the emperor in the afterlife. In other words, they believed that even after death, the emperor deserved to exist in a world surrounded by rare creatures and powerful symbols. However, according to researcher Wu Xianzhu from the Hubei Provincial Institute of Archaeology in China, among all these discoveries, the panda skeleton remains the most remarkable. It holds not only archaeological value, but also reflects a very long historical relationship between humans and this extraordinary animal. Looking at the present day makes this story even more thought-provoking. According to recent estimates, only about 300 to 400 kinling pandas are believed to remain in the wild today. Once a creature associated with imperial symbolism more than 2,000 years ago, the kinling panda has now become one of the rarest animals on Earth. Pretty fascinating, isn't it? The 1,800-year-old tomb of the warrior who died twice. In the middle of a peaceful field, no one would likely imagine that anything unusual lies beneath the ground. In fact, I never would have thought so, and neither did archaeologists. But this time, they truly surprised the world when they announced the discovery of an ancient tomb dating back about 1,800 years, found in a field in southern Wales. At first, everything seemed like a fairly ordinary archaeological discovery. But the deeper the excavation went, the more researchers realized that this tomb was hiding a strange story, one that left even the experts puzzled. The tomb was discovered near the ruins of an ancient Roman villa, a structure that had existed thousands of years ago. The remaining traces suggest that this area was once home to relatively wealthy individuals or people who held a certain status in ancient Roman society. Because of that, when the skeleton inside the tomb slowly emerged, researchers quickly realized that this was not an ordinary person. The man buried in this grave was likely a Roman warrior. Next to his remains, archaeologists discovered an elegant silver pin and a sword, items often associated with honor and status for soldiers in Roman society. In addition, the body had been wrapped in a warrior's cloak, suggesting that this man had once been respected and held a recognized position within his community. Up to this point, everything might sound fairly normal. Nothing particularly unusual, right? But the detail that made scientists frown was not the man's identity. It was the position of the skeleton. Unlike 3 other graves from the same period found nearby, where the bodies had been placed lying on their backs according to traditional burial customs, this man had been buried face down in the ground. And that wasn't all. Around his neck, back, and feet, archaeologists found large iron nails. These marks suggest that while he was alive, he may have been tightly bound, possibly even restrained until the moment he died. Think about that for a moment. Why would someone who was buried with the honors of a warrior also be tied up and buried face down? Further analysis of the bones and teeth revealed even more surprising details. Scientists determined that the man was only between 21 and 25 years old at the time of his death. They also discovered that he had suffered from a severe ear infection, a condition that may actually have caused his death. However, the most controversial aspect remains the burial ritual itself. According to the research team led by Evan Chapman, a senior archaeologist at the National Museum Wales, this unusual burial method could symbolize that the man had died twice. It may sound strange, but in the ancient beliefs of many cultures, burying someone face down or restraining the body was a form of protective ritual meant to prevent the dead from rising again. In simpler terms, people in the past may have been trying to seal the spirit of the deceased, ensuring that he would not return as a restless ghost. Yet here lies the paradox. This man was still buried with a sword and a warrior's cloak, clear symbols of honor. His tomb was also carefully constructed using large stones, which suggests that those who buried him still showed a certain degree of respect. So what exactly happened 1,800 years ago? That question is difficult to answer. What researchers do know is that this was not the only strange case in the area. Previously, archaeologists had discovered another grave containing a skeleton that had been beheaded after death, with the skull placed at the feet. This type of burial was sometimes used in the past to prevent people suspected of being vampires from returning to life. A series of discoveries like these has led scientists to believe that something mysterious may once have happened in this region, something that caused local people to adopt unusual burial rituals to guard against something they feared. The only problem is, what exactly was that terrifying thing? Even today, not even the world's leading scientists have been able to explain it. The 200-year-old vampire grave in Poland and the terrifying burial of 450 supposedly cursed bodies. Some archaeological discoveries amaze us because of their historical value, but others are so unsettling that even scientists feel a chill when they see them. And the story that took place in a small village in Poland is one such example. While road construction was underway in the village of Luzino in northeastern Poland, workers unexpectedly uncovered a strange grave deep beneath the ground. At first, they assumed it was simply an old burial site, but when archaeologists were called in to excavate and the layers of soil were gradually removed, what appeared shocked everyone present. The first skeletons emerged in a truly disturbing position. The skulls of the deceased had been separated from their bodies and placed between their legs. And that wasn't all. Inside their mouths, archaeologists also found small coins. If it had been only one or two skeletons arranged this way, it might have been considered a rare case. But what stunned everyone even more was the sheer number of bodies found at the site, around 450 people. Just imagine that for a moment. 450 skeletons, all buried using the same strange and frightening ritual. So what exactly happened in this village more than 200 years ago? According to archaeologists, this mass burial site dates back to the 19th century. In addition to the skeletons scattered throughout the ground, researchers also discovered 3 enormous jars filled with human bones. All of these clues suggest that this was not an ordinary cemetery, but rather a mass burial site with very unusual rituals. Local archaeologist Maciej Stromski, one of the leaders of the excavation, explained that this type of burial reflects an ancient belief driven by fear that the dead might rise again from their graves. In other words, the people buried here had once been suspected of being vampires. It may sound like something straight out of a horror movie, but in the past, this belief was actually very common in many parts of Eastern Europe, especially in Poland. At that time, people believed that some individuals could return after death as blood-drinking creatures that preyed on the living. To prevent that from happening, communities sometimes carried out extreme protective rituals. For example, placing the skull between the legs was believed to prevent the dead person from finding their head again if they attempted to rise from the grave. The coin placed in the mouth also carried symbolic meaning, possibly intended to seal the spirit or prevent the corpse from biting others. However, what puzzles scientists the most is why so many people were buried this way at the same time. One theory suggests that this area may have experienced a major epidemic about 200 years ago. During that era, when medical knowledge was still limited, many diseases with unusual symptoms could easily make people believe that victims were possessed or showing signs of becoming vampires. For instance, people suffering from severe anemia often had extremely pale skin and sometimes sought animal blood as a desperate attempt to survive. Certain genetic disorders also forced patients to avoid sunlight, another trait that closely resembles the legendary description of vampires. In addition, tuberculosis, a disease that was very common at the time, could cause victims to become thin, pale, and even cough up blood. To people in the past, symptoms like these could easily be mistaken for the signs of a blood-drinking creature. So when someone died under strange circumstances, the community might decide to perform protective burial rituals to prevent the worst from happening. In fact, in traditional Polish folklore, there were many different ways to stop a vampire from rising again. Some graves included garlic, crosses, or holy water placed beside the body. But in more extreme cases, people might even decapitate the corpse, drive a stake through the heart, or seal the body inside a metal coffin. Even so, discovering a burial site with hundreds of individuals treated as vampires, like the one in Luzino, is extraordinarily rare. And even today, the biggest question remains unanswered. Was it fear of disease and unexplained phenomena that led an entire community to believe they were living among vampires? Or could there still be some deeper secret hidden in the history of this small village? What do you think about the ancient Polish belief in vampires? Leave your thoughts in the comments below so everyone can share their opinions. The 1,400-year-old folding chair, a strange treasure in the tomb of a medieval noblewoman. During archaeological excavations, researchers usually expect to find familiar objects such as ancient coins, weapons, jewelry, or other valuable artifacts from the past. But sometimes history surprises scientists with discoveries so unusual that they seem almost unbelievable. And a story from a small village in Germany is one such example. It captured the attention of the entire archaeological community because the object discovered in this ancient grave was not gold or jewels as one might expect, but instead an iron folding chair. At first, that might sound quite ordinary. After all, folding chairs are common items today. We often see them in backyard gardens, on picnics, or during outdoor camping trips. But what makes this discovery remarkable is that the chair was buried together with its owner about 1,400 years ago. Yes, you heard that correctly. An object that might seem like something invented only in modern times had actually existed more than 14 centuries ago. The ancient tomb was excavated in the village of Endsee, located in the region of Bavaria in southeastern Germany. As archaeologists carefully dug through the layers of ancient soil, they uncovered the skeleton of a middle-aged woman who was estimated to have been between 40 and 50 years old at the time of her death. But what surprised them most was not the skeleton itself, it was the object buried beside her, an iron folding chair, designed in a way that looks strikingly similar to the folding chairs we use today. According to archaeologist Hubert Fair from the Bavarian State Office for the Preservation of Monuments, the chair's frame measures about 27.5 by 18 inches. When experts examined its structure, they realized that it truly was a collapsible folding chair, a design that seems surprisingly modern. Around 600 AD, when ironworking technology and the use of iron were still limited in many parts of Europe, producing an object like this would not have been easy. That fact alone makes the chair a genuine treasure for its time. Rust on the iron frame still preserves traces of wood and leather, two materials that likely form the seat itself. This suggests that the chair was originally quite refined and carefully crafted. Some researchers even believe the woman may have been placed on the chair before being laid to rest in the tomb. At this point, many people might wonder, why bury a chair with the deceased? In reality, iron folding chairs have been discovered in a few other ancient graves across Europe, but they are extremely rare. Interestingly, these chairs almost always appear alongside luxurious grave goods. Because of this, archaeologists believe that such chairs were not simply everyday furniture. They may have been symbols of power and social status. In other words, the person buried with this chair was likely someone extremely important within her community, perhaps a noblewoman, a female ruler, or even a powerful religious figure. Other treasures found in the tomb strengthen this theory. Alongside the skeleton, archaeologists discovered a necklace made of pearls and colorful glass beads, an intricately decorated belt, and several personal items such as spinning tools. In particular, a beautifully patterned glass bead helped scientists determine that the tomb dates back roughly 1,400 years. But the story does not end there. Not far from the woman's tomb, archaeologists also discovered another grave, this time belonging to a mysterious man. His tomb also contained luxurious items such as a spear, a shield, an expensive belt, and various personal tools. All these details have led researchers to believe that the area around Endsee may once have been home to an elite class within medieval society. As for that folding chair, it may not simply have been an ancient piece of furniture. It might once have served as a symbolic throne, representing the authority of a powerful woman who lived more than 1,000 years ago. However, this is still only a theory. To learn more about the secrets of this unusual artifact, scientists are now planning to X-ray the chair. Who knows? Hidden within the layers of that ancient metal, there may still be clues that could reveal the true identity of the mysterious woman who carried her throne with her into the earth for 1,400 years. And honestly, that possibility isn't far-fetched. Because in the end, the ancient world remains something deeply mysterious, something we may never be able to fully explain. The pants that remained intact after 3,000 years underground. In the harsh desert region west of the Tarim Basin in China, an area known for its scorching winds, swirling sandstorms, and a remarkable number of naturally preserved ancient mummies, archaeologists made a discovery that surprised the entire scientific community. Interestingly, what they found was not gold, not ancient weapons, and not even the skeletal remains or mummies that are usually uncovered in such places. Instead, it was something very familiar to us today, a pair of pants. That may sound completely ordinary at first, but what makes this discovery extraordinary is that the pants had been buried underground for nearly 3,000 years, and yet they remained almost perfectly intact. This remarkable artifact was discovered at the Yanghai Cemetery, an ancient burial site located in the harsh desert environment of Xinjiang, China. In fact, the location itself helps explain the pant's incredible preservation. According to scientists, the region's extremely dry and hot climate allows many organic materials, such as fabric, leather, and even human remains, to survive for thousands of years with minimal decay. As archaeologists carefully excavated layer after layer of soil at the site, they uncovered around 500 ancient skeletons. But among them, one particular grave captured the attention of researchers. Inside lay the remains of an ancient man whom researchers later nicknamed the Turfin Man. And beside his skeleton, they discovered what is now considered the oldest pair of pants ever found. According to archaeologist Mikey Wagner from the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin, the pants are not only ancient, but also demonstrate an astonishing level of craftsmanship. They were designed as full-length trousers, remarkably similar in style to the pants people wear today. What surprised experts even more was the way the pants were made. Instead of cutting separate pieces of fabric and sewing them together, as was common in many ancient garments, these pants were woven as a single piece from the very beginning. In other words, the weaver created the shape of the trousers directly on the loom. The technique used is known as twill weaving, a fairly complex textile method for a time nearly 3,000 years ago. In this technique, threads are woven diagonally to form parallel diagonal lines. This not only strengthens the fabric, but also creates visually striking patterns. Looking at this craftsmanship, many scientists believe that the ancient weaver must have possessed exceptionally advanced skills. But the story of these 3,000-year-old pants doesn't end there. When archaeologists continued studying the tomb of the Turfin Man, they discovered several other fascinating artifacts. Next to the skeleton was a belted cloak, braided cords used to tie the pant legs below the knees, and soft leather boots that reached up to the ankles. There was also a wool headband decorated with bronze pieces and seashells, a leather bridle, and notably, an axe. These items led scientists to propose an interesting theory. This man may have been a horseback warrior. If you think about it, long trousers with a flexible design would have been extremely practical for horseback riding in ancient times. This suggests that clothing was not only about appearance, but was also closely connected to the lifestyle of the people who wore it. Moreover, these ancient pants reveal something important about history. According to experts, the weaving techniques and decorative patterns show signs of cultural exchange between different regions across the Eurasian continent. This suggests that thousands of years ago, communities living along ancient travel routes may have shared technologies, ideas, and artistic styles far more extensively than we once believed. And from something as simple as a pair of pants, scientists can trace the development of textile technology, social life, and even ancient trade routes. In other words, this 3,000-year-old pair of pants is far more than just an ancient piece of clothing. It is like a fragment of history, helping us imagine the lives of people who once lived in that harsh desert environment thousands of years ago. And it is very possible that deep beneath the sands of the Tarim Basin, many more ancient stories are still waiting to be discovered. The sealed skeleton of a female vampire that terrified experts. An ordinary archaeological excavation suddenly turned into a chilling story that seemed to come straight out of legend. That's exactly what archaeologists experienced beneath the cold soil of northern Poland. There, they discovered a strange grave dating back to around the 17th to 18th century. Inside the burial site were the skeletal remains of a woman. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't just the skeleton itself. It was the way people in the past had buried her. A haunting kind of seal, seemingly intended to prevent the dead from returning to the world of the living. The grave was found near the city of Bydgoszcz, where a research team led by Professor Dariusz Poliński from Nicholas Copernicus University in the city of Torun was conducting excavations. As the soil was gradually brushed away, the skeleton of a woman slowly emerged. However, what shocked the archaeologists was the position of a metal object resting directly across the skeleton's neck, a sickle. The sickle had not been placed there randomly. It had been driven into the ground at a particular angle, with its curved blade pressed tightly against the neck of the deceased. According to Professor Poliński, people in the past positioned the sickle this way as a precaution in case the corpse were to sit up. If the person in the grave were to rise, The blade would immediately cut into the neck, potentially severing the head or at least causing severe injury, thereby preventing the dead from returning to haunt the living. Hearing this, many people might wonder, why would a woman be treated in such a frightening way after death? The answer lies in the historical context of Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries. At that time, stories about vampires spread widely across the continent, from small rural villages to large towns. People believed that some individuals could return after death to drink blood or bring disaster upon their communities. And sometimes, just one unusual detail, a mysterious death, or even a malicious rumor could cause a completely ordinary person to be labeled a vampire. In this case, the woman in the grave may have been suspected because of a somewhat unusual physical feature. After examining the remains, researchers noticed that the skeleton had two noticeably protruding front teeth. Today, we would simply consider this a normal biological trait, but through the superstitious lens of people in the past, it could sometimes be interpreted as a sign of a witch or a vampire. Interestingly, the sickle around her neck was not the only strange element of the burial. The skeleton also had another unusual detail, a padlock attached to the toe of her left foot. According to researchers, the lock likely served as a symbolic seal, intended to keep the spirit of the deceased confined within the grave and prevent it from returning to disturb the living. Yet the mystery deepens because of a detail that seems completely contradictory to the superstition behind the burial. The woman was buried wearing a silk head cap, a luxury item at that time. This suggests that during her lifetime, she may have been relatively wealthy or held a respected position in society. Just think about it. A person who may have once been respected or even admired while alive, yet after death was treated as if she were a terrifying creature from folklore. Doesn't that clearly reflect the deep fears and powerful superstitions of people during that era? In fact, this is not the first time archaeologists have discovered graves with anti-vampire features in Poland. Previously, in the city of Krakow, skeletons were found that had been decapitated, another method believed to prevent the dead from rising again. In Kamień-Pomorski, another skeleton was even discovered with a brick placed inside its mouth, as if to block a mouth people believed might drink blood. Discoveries like these remind us that history is not only about wars or dynasties. Sometimes it is also about deeply human stories, about fear, belief, and the way societies deal with things they simply cannot explain. The 1,500-year-old warrior skeleton guarding the banks of the Thames. In a peaceful field in the county of Berkshire in United Kingdom, where today only the wind moves across the grass and the River Thames flows quietly by, archaeologists have discovered an ancient grave that brings history back to life after more than 1,500 years. Beneath what appeared to be an ordinary layer of soil lay the skeletal remains of a man buried with weapons, a mysterious Anglo-Saxon warrior whom researchers later named the Marlow Warlord. The discovery was announced after an excavation in a field near the town of Marlow. According to archaeologists, the skeleton belonged to a man who lived around the 6th century, roughly 1,500 years ago. What immediately caught their attention was the way the man had been buried. This was not a simple grave. Alongside the body were weapons such as spears and a sword, items typically associated with warriors. In fact, the area had already attracted the attention of researchers earlier. About 2 years before the official excavation, metal detector hobbyists discovered several bronze bowls scattered beneath the soil. Those early finds led archaeologists to suspect that an ancient burial site might exist beneath the field. Dr. Gabor Thomas, an archaeologist from University of Reading and a member of the excavation team, explained that burying someone with weapons does not always mean the person was a warrior. Sometimes it was simply a symbolic ritual meant to represent the deceased person's social status. However, in the case of the Marlow warlord, several signs suggest that this man may indeed have been a real warrior. When scientists analyzed the skeleton, they estimated that the man stood over 6 feet tall, an impressive height for that time period. The bone structure also indicates that his muscles had once been highly developed, suggesting a physically powerful individual accustomed to combat or heavy labor. Dr. Thomas even commented quite frankly, "I think he was very muscular." From that description alone, it is easy to picture the large figure of a warrior who may once have fought in battles during the Anglo-Saxon era. But what makes this grave even more remarkable lies in its location and arrangement. Unlike many skeletons from the same period that were buried in communal cemeteries, the Marlow warlord was placed in a completely isolated position. The body was buried along a north-south axis, with the face directed toward the River Thames. According to archaeologists, this arrangement was likely not accidental. It may have carried symbolic meaning, as if the warrior were still watching over his land even after death. This interpretation becomes even more plausible when researchers consider the historical context of the region. Dr. Thomas explained that the stretch of the River Thames running through Marlow and Maidenhead once served as an important territorial boundary during the Anglo-Saxon period. Throughout different periods of history, the area witnessed numerous conflicts between tribes and neighboring kingdoms. Because of that, burying a warrior in a location overlooking the river may have been a way to assert control over the territory. In other words, this man may once have been a highly important figure, possibly even a leader of a local tribe. Archaeologists have also found several signs suggesting that he belonged to the wealthy class. The bronze bowls and weapons buried with the body indicate that he likely held high social status during his lifetime. Today, the artifacts recovered from the grave, including the bronze bowls and spearheads, are expected to be displayed at the Buckinghamshire County Museum in Aylesbury after the restoration process is completed. Meanwhile, the skeleton of the Marlow warlord is still being studied by experts. Researchers plan to analyze it further to determine his lifespan, health condition, and any diseases he may have suffered from. Early signs suggest that he may have had arthritis, and his teeth show significant wear, something commonly found in people who lived thousands of years ago. Although she did not participate directly in the excavation, Professor Helena Hamerow from University of Oxford described the discovery as extremely important. She explained that in the Middle Thames region, it is very rare to find graves from the same period containing so many valuable burial goods. Even more intriguing, some of the objects in the grave appear to have originated from areas that are now part of northern France. This suggests that trade or cultural connections existed between different regions of Europe more than 1,000 years ago. All of these details mean that the Marlow warlord is not just an ancient skeleton. Instead, he represents an important piece of the puzzle, helping scientists better understand the Anglo-Saxon period, a turbulent era in which tribes, territories, and power were constantly shifting. The 2,000-year-old Roman ship and the mysterious cargo beneath the Mediterranean. Deep beneath the cold waters of the Mediterranean Sea, where sunlight can barely reach, countless stories of history have remained buried for thousands of years. And sometimes, a single underwater survey is enough to bring a piece of the ancient world back into the present. A recent discovery by Italian scientists has sparked great excitement in the archaeological community. Researchers announced that they had located an ancient Roman ship resting at a depth of about 525 feet on the seafloor near the port city of Civitavecchia, roughly 50 miles from Rome. When the first images from underwater survey equipment were transmitted to the surface, experts were almost holding their breath. Beneath layers of mud and marine sediment lay the hull of an ancient cargo ship measuring more than 65 feet long. According to researchers' estimates, the vessel may have sunk sometime around the 1st or 2nd century BC, meaning it has rested on the seabed for more than 2,000 years. But what makes this discovery truly remarkable is not just the ship itself, it is the cargo it was carrying. Inside the ship's hold were hundreds of ancient Roman ceramic jars, known as amphorae. These containers were arranged fairly neatly, and many of them remain surprisingly intact. Based on how they were categorized and stacked, archaeologists believe this ship was once part of an important commercial voyage. Just imagine the scene. More than 2,000 years ago, this vessel may have departed from a harbor carrying goods destined for a distant port somewhere within the Roman Empire. But then, for some unknown reason, perhaps a violent storm, an accident, or a technical failure, the ship sank to the bottom of the sea and remained there undisturbed until today. Doesn't that thought give you chills? However, despite the discovery of many amphorae, scientists still cannot say for certain what these jars once contained. In ancient Roman times, amphorae were commonly used to transport wine, olive oil, or other valuable food products. Yet in the case of this newly discovered ship, the true contents of its cargo remain a mystery. According to Italy's National Cultural Heritage Protection Police, the discovery is extremely significant for the study of ancient maritime history. It highlights just how extensive and complex Roman sea trade routes across the Mediterranean Sea once were. Ships like this did more than simply transport goods. They served as evidence of trade networks and connections between many different regions surrounding the Mediterranean. In fact, the waters around Italy have long been considered a massive archaeological treasure trove. Along the Mediterranean coastline, countless ancient shipwrecks still lie on the seafloor, carrying artifacts of enormous historical value. For this reason, diving teams from Italian law enforcement regularly patrol these areas to protect them from illegal artifact hunters. And that concern is very real. In 2021 alone, archaeologists in Sicily discovered 2 additional ancient Roman ships. One was located off the coast of Palermo, while the other was found near the island of Ustica. Both ships contained large numbers of jars once used to store wine, a very common commodity in Roman trade. Even earlier, in 2013, scientists discovered another remarkably well-preserved Roman shipwreck off the coast of Genoa, dating back to the 2nd century BC. Unfortunately, not every discovery remains intact. Some of the cargo from the ship recently discovered near Civitavecchia had already been stolen before authorities were able to secure the site. Those artifacts were later illegally offered for sale on underground markets in northern Italy. According to police statistics, hundreds of ancient Roman amphorae are still discovered in illegal trade each year. In June 2021, Italian authorities recovered numerous artifacts from ancient shipwrecks that had been part of an illegal collection owned by a Belgian collector. Some of these items dated as far back as the 6th century BC and were valued at around 11 million euros. Meanwhile, in the region of Puglia, scientists have also uncovered nearly 800 rare artifacts, including ancient stone steles, ceramic vessels, and many other objects that had previously been secretly excavated. All of these discoveries are gradually helping researchers piece together the story of an empire that once dominated the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. And who knows, perhaps right now, beneath those deep waters, there are still other Roman ships resting silently on the seafloor, carrying treasures and historical stories that have never yet been told. What do you think? The 2,000-year-old Roman ceremonial chariot discovered intact, Pompeii's final mystery. After nearly 2,000 years buried beneath volcanic ash, among the ruins of a city that vanished from the world, archaeologists made a surprising discovery: a nearly intact Roman chariot. This was not just a rusted piece of metal, nor a few scattered parts. It was an entire beautiful ceremonial chariot, once belonging to the wealthy class of the ancient world. Even more remarkable, it was discovered just outside the city of Pompeii, a place already famous for its tragic history. The story begins at an ancient villa in the suburban area of Civita Giuliana, located about 2,300 feet north of the walls of ancient Pompeii. This site was once a luxurious estate belonging to the Roman elite. During excavations at the villa, archaeologists uncovered something that stunned the entire research community: a 4-wheeled ceremonial chariot that had remained almost completely intact for thousands of years. This vehicle was far from an ordinary Roman means of transportation. It was crafted with extraordinary detail, featuring 4 sturdy iron wheels, while the body of the chariot was decorated with shimmering bronze and tin panels. Even more remarkable is that many organic elements, things that would normally disappear over time, left behind clear traces. Pieces of mineralized wood, the ropes that once tied the chariot's components together, and even decorative patterns shaped like flowers and leaves were preserved in astonishing condition. But what makes the discovery even more intriguing is that part of the story had already begun to emerge years earlier. Back in 2018, archaeologists working in the same area of Civita Giuliana discovered 3 horse skeletons. One of them still showed traces of a harness on its head, indicating that the horse had once been saddled and prepared to pull a vehicle. At the time, that discovery led many researchers to suspect that the location may have once served as a stable or carriage area for the villa. Now, with the discovery of this ceremonial chariot, the pieces of the puzzle finally seem to be coming together. The area where the chariot was found was not an ordinary space. It was located beneath a 2-story portico that opened into an uncovered courtyard. The ceiling had been made of oak wood, and remarkably, the wooden beams were carbonized by the volcanic disaster, yet their structure remained almost perfectly preserved. These unique conditions helped protect the chariot from the destructive effects of time. However, excavating the chariot was far from easy. The remaining materials were extremely fragile. Even a small mistake could have destroyed priceless details. For that reason, archaeologists carried out an extremely careful micro-excavation. Experts specializing in wood, metal, and artifact restoration worked together, slowly freeing the chariot piece by piece from the hardened volcanic ash and fossilized lava that surrounded it. Once the on-site excavation was completed, the components of the chariot were transported to a laboratory for further restoration. There, conservation specialists began removing the rock-hard layers of volcanic material that had clung to the structure of the chariot for nearly 2,000 years. Every small detail was carefully cleaned, analyzed, and restored, allowing researchers to reconstruct the original appearance of the vehicle as accurately as possible. According to Massimo Ossana, the acting director of the Pompeii Archaeological Park at the time, this is an extremely significant discovery because it helps us better understand the ancient world. He explained that this chariot was not a vehicle used in everyday life. It was neither a cargo cart nor a farming vehicle. In fact, it was a special type of ceremonial carriage known in some ancient texts as a palentum. This type of chariot typically appeared only during important occasions, religious festivals, formal processions, or major ceremonial events in Roman society. In other words, it was a symbol of power, wealth, and social status. But this raises fascinating questions. What event was this chariot once used for? Who did it carry during the final glorious days of Pompeii? And when Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79 AD, was this chariot being prepared for some kind of ceremony? Those questions still remain unanswered. Yet discoveries like this make history feel more alive than ever, because sometimes even a single chariot buried beneath volcanic ash can tell the story of an entire lost world of humanity. 2. 4,000-year-old skeletons found stacked on top of each other in an ancient grave on the Isle of Bute. It began as an ordinary morning in a quiet field on the Isle of Bute in Scotland. The sea breeze drifted gently across the land, and the soil was being plowed just like any other day. But this time, beneath that familiar layer of earth lay a story that had been sleeping for more than 4 millennia. Yes, you heard that right, 4 full millennia. While working in the field, a farmer accidentally struck something unusual beneath the blade of his plow. At first, he may have assumed it was just a rock or a piece of rotting wood. But as the soil was gradually pushed aside, a discovery appeared before him that would send chills down anyone's spine. An ancient grave dating back to the Bronze Age, containing human remains that had rested there for around 4,000 years. As soon as the news spread, archaeologists quickly arrived to examine this remarkable discovery. However, the deeper they dug, the more mysterious and difficult the story beneath the soil became. Archaeologists soon realized that the grave did not contain just one individual. It contained 2 people buried on top of each other. This detail immediately caught the attention of researchers because this type of burial arrangement was not always common in ancient funerary practices. The body placed on top belonged to an adult man. Based on bone analysis, experts estimate that he was between 35 and 50 years old at the time of his death. He stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall, which was fairly close to the average height for people of that era. Interestingly, markings on the skeleton suggest that he appeared to have been in relatively good health during his lifetime. There were few signs of serious illness, leading researchers to believe that he may have lived a fairly stable life within his community. But the story does not end there. Directly beneath the man lay the remains of a woman, and she was most likely a young teenage girl. The 2 skeletons were stacked together inside the same grave, as if they had been placed there as part of some special ritual thousands of years ago. So who were they to each other? Were they relatives, husband and wife, or simply 2 individuals buried together for reasons that history has long forgotten? To search for answers, scientists carried out chemical analyses on the bones of both individuals. The results revealed an interesting detail. Their diet appeared to contain very little protein from marine sources, even though they lived on an island. Instead, most of their nutrition came from land-based protein, possibly from domesticated animals or plants. This discovery helped researchers gain a better understanding of the lifestyle of the ancient community that once lived in this region. However, despite numerous analyses, scientists still cannot determine the exact relationship between the man and the young girl. They are also unsure whether the 2 were buried at the same time or if one burial took place sometime after the other. For now, those questions remain unanswered, like a missing piece of history that has yet to be fully put together. 5,000-year-old rock. carving reveals a mysterious ancient Egyptian conquest. In the dry desert of the Sinai Peninsula, where sun-scorched mountain ranges stretch all the way to the horizon, archaeologists have discovered a detail that is prompting ancient history to take another look at itself. At the site of Wadi Kamila in southern Sinai, an ancient rock carving has unexpectedly emerged after being hidden beneath the dust and sand of time for thousands of years. What makes this discovery particularly remarkable is its age, around 3000 BC, meaning it was created nearly 5,000 years ago. Hearing that, many people might wonder, what could be so special about a rock carving that it would attract so much attention from archaeologists? I wondered the same thing at first, but when you look closely at the images carved into the surface of the rock, the story behind them quickly becomes fascinating. At the center of the carving is the image of a man walking with both arms raised, as if displaying his strength. This pose is far from random. In ancient art, especially in the great civilizations, such gestures often symbolize power, victory, and domination. Directly beneath that figure, however, is a completely different scene. Another man kneeling on the ground with his hands tied behind his back. To make matters even more dramatic, an arrow appears to be lodged straight into his chest. That detail alone turns the rock carving into a vivid story from the distant past. It is not merely a work of art. It resembles a visual record of an event that took place thousands of years ago. And if you look even more closely, behind the kneeling man, there is also the image of a boat. For many ancient civilizations, a boat was simply a means of transportation. But for ancient Egypt, boats carried a much deeper meaning. They symbolized power, strength, and control over territory, especially during expeditions and trading missions. When all of these details are considered together, archaeologists believe that the rock carving at Wadi Kamila is unlikely to be a random drawing. It may actually be depicting the success of an ancient Egyptian expedition in the southern Sinai region. Interestingly, this area has long been known for containing numerous ancient traces connected to Egypt. In the past, researchers have discovered some of the earliest carvings and inscriptions describing Egypt's military and economic control over local communities. This suggests that the Sinai Peninsula was not merely a barren wilderness. Instead, it once served as an important strategic region. During the pre-dynastic period, the early dynastic period, and even the Old Kingdom, Egyptian rulers frequently organized large expeditions to this region. Their objective was clear: to exploit the valuable resources that the Sinai Peninsula had to offer. From minerals and precious stones to raw materials used for construction and craftsmanship, these resources made the region a vital destination for the ancient Egyptian economy. And the artistic relief discovered this time appears to be a visual piece of that larger story. It almost functions like a declaration carved in stone, a declaration of victory, of power, and of Egypt's success in extending its influence into southern Sinai. You see, even though it is just a rock carving on a desert cliff, it can still tell us an entire chapter of history stretching back thousands of years, and that in itself is truly fascinating. Mammoth skull, containing a strange object, shocks the archaeological world. In the freezing lands of Russia, there is an archaeological site where, almost every time scientists set foot there, they are nearly guaranteed to uncover something that forces history to add a few new lines to its story. That place is the Zaraïsk Archaeological Site, an ancient site located not far from what is now the Moscow region. At first glance, many people might think it is just an ordinary stretch of land, with layers of soil and stone piled up over tens of thousands of years. But in reality, deep beneath the ground lie the remains of one of the oldest known human settlements in the Moscow region. For many years, archaeologists working there have uncovered numerous pieces of evidence showing that humans once lived in this area during the Paleolithic period, also known as the Old Stone Age. The remains of ancient dwellings, crude stone tools, and traces of ancient fireplaces all tell the story of people who lived here tens of thousands of years ago. But that's not all. The area is also famous for the large number of fossils belonging to a gigantic animal that once dominated the icy landscapes of prehistoric times, the woolly mammoth. Paleontologists have repeatedly discovered mammoth skulls, bones, and teeth at this site, suggesting that these enormous animals were once very common in the region. Researchers have also uncovered an ancient hearth filled with burned animal bones, along with traces of charcoal and scattered layers of red ochre throughout the area. These details show that prehistoric people not only hunted mammoths, but also knew how to use fire and organize relatively complex daily activities. However, among the many discoveries at Zaraisk, one recent find has truly surprised the archaeological community. During excavations and analysis using modern archaeological techniques, experts from the Russian Academy of Sciences discovered a woolly mammoth skull that appeared to be quite unusual. At first glance, it looked like any other fossilized skull. But upon closer examination, scientists realized that this skull was not simply the remains of an animal that had died tens of thousands of years ago. Instead, it appeared to have been used by humans as a kind of natural storage container. It sounds hard to believe, doesn't it? A massive mammoth skull used to store objects. According to researchers, people during the Paleolithic period took advantage of the hollow structure inside the skull to store various items. This discovery immediately caused a stir in the archaeological world because it suggests that prehistoric humans were not simply surviving on instinct, they were also capable of intelligently using the resources around them. The leader of the archaeological team, Sergei Lev, of the Institute of Archaeology at the Russian Academy of Sciences, explained that the researchers found quartz objects and tools used for making weapons hidden inside the mammoth skull. This means that the enormous skull may once have served as a place to store important items for the people living in this ancient settlement. However, one question still remains unanswered. Was this simply a personal storage place, or was it a shared storage space used by an entire group of people? For now, no one can say for certain. But one thing is clear. Every time another layer of ancient soil at Zaraisk is uncovered, the past reveals yet another hidden secret. And sometimes, something as simple as a mammoth skull can tell us an entire story about the creativity, adaptability, and intelligence of humans who lived tens of thousands of years ago. For archaeologists, discoveries like this carry truly enormous significance. The mysterious attic mummy, a shocking discovery by a 10-year-old boy in Germany. You know, the world of archaeology is full of fascinating stories. Some archaeological discoveries don't begin in deserts, pyramids, or massive excavation sites. Sometimes they start in the most ordinary places, like a dusty attic in an old house. What makes this story even more unbelievable is that the person who discovered it was not a scientist or an archaeologist. It was simply a 10-year-old boy. That boy's name is Alexander Kettler, who lives in the town of Diepholz in Lower Saxony, Germany, in the northern part of the country. One day, while curiously exploring his grandmother's attic, a place usually filled with old items that had been forgotten for years, Alexander suddenly came across a rather unusual large chest. Inside the chest was a stone coffin carved with patterns that looked strikingly similar to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. And what was even more astonishing was that inside the coffin, there was a mummy wrapped tightly in layers of bandages. Hearing this, many people might wonder, how could an Egyptian mummy end up in the attic of a house in Germany? It does sound hard to believe. But the story doesn't end there. Along with the mummy, the coffin also contained an ancient mask and a special jar, the type of container that people in ancient Egypt once used to store internal organs after they were removed from the body during the mummification process. All of these items had been placed inside a wooden crate, much like the way historical artifacts are often stored or transported. Naturally, the discovery shocked Alexander's family. His father, Lutz Wolfgang Kettler, who works as a dentist, could hardly believe that such a strange object had been sitting quietly in the attic for years without anyone noticing. What surprised him even more was that the mummy had no odor at all, and it seemed to have been there for at least over 40 years without being discovered. Faced with such an unusual situation, Mr. Kettler decided not to examine the mummy himself by taking x-rays or unwrapping the bandages. Instead, he planned to load the coffin into his car and transport it to Berlin, where experts and researchers could conduct a more thorough examination. But what makes this story even more intriguing is the possible origin of the mummy. According to Mr. Kettler, his father, Alexander's grandfather, once traveled to North Africa in the 1950s. It is quite possible that during that trip, he brought home a very unusual souvenir from Egypt. It may sound unbelievable, but in the mid-20th century, the buying and selling of Egyptian mummies did sometimes occur in certain places. Wealthy collectors or tourists occasionally brought artifacts, and sometimes even mummies, home as display pieces. Because of that, the possibility that this coffin in the attic actually came from Egypt is not entirely unreasonable. However, researchers cannot draw any immediate conclusions. They still need to determine whether the mummy and the accompanying objects are truly ancient Egyptian artifacts thousands of years old, or simply very skillfully made replicas. Or perhaps something entirely different that no one has even considered yet. So who was the mummy really? Did it truly come from ancient Egypt? And if it is authentic, how did it end up inside an ordinary house in Germany? Perhaps the answers are still hidden somewhere within the layers of bandages wrapped around that mummy, waiting for scientists to uncover them. The only question is when those discoveries will finally be made, and when they will be officially revealed to the public. For now, no one can say with 100% certainty. So until then, we'll just have to wait and see. The Maya monster mouth city, revealed in the jungles of Mexico, a mysterious gateway to the underworld. Deep within the nearly untouched jungle of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, an unexpected archaeological discovery has captured the attention of scientists. Hidden beneath dense tree canopies and layers of soil that have built up over centuries, the remains of an ancient Maya city have gradually come to light. What makes this place remarkable is not only its ruined pyramids and ancient palaces, but also a strange stone gateway carved in the shape of the mouth of a gigantic monster. The traces of this ancient city were discovered in dense jungle in the central Yucatan Peninsula, southeast of the Mexican state of Campeche. The vegetation in this region is so thick that reaching the area by land is nearly impossible. For many years, the site seemed like a forgotten land, where nature had completely reclaimed everything that humans once built. Interestingly, the clue that led to this discovery came from aerial photographs. The leader of the expedition, archaeologist Ivan Spraj from the Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts, ZRCCZU, explained that satellite images helped his team pinpoint the exact location of ancient ruins hidden deep within the forest. The research team's survey area covered roughly 1,780 square miles, located between two well-known archaeological regions, Rio Bec and Chinas. These regions once flourished during the early Classic to late Classic periods of Maya civilization, roughly between 600 and 1000 AD, and it was here that the traces of a mysterious ancient city slowly began to emerge. The most distinctive feature of this city is its entrance, which was carved into the shape of the mouth of a gigantic monster. From a distance, the stone doorway looks like a wide-open jaw, giving the impression that anyone entering the structure is walking straight through the mouth of a mythical creature. According to Ivan Sprajis, this imagery was not accidental. In Maya belief, the monster mouth symbol represented a deity associated with fertility and life force. At the same time, it was believed to symbolize the entrance to a sacred cave, one that could connect the living world with the underworld or the spirits of ancestors. In fact, this area had been mentioned decades earlier. In the 1970s, American archaeologist Eric von O discovered several stone stelae at the site. He produced sketches of some of the ancient structures, but these documents were never widely published. More importantly, the exact location of the city he called Lagunita remained a mystery for many years. According to Ivan Spraj, the old information about Lagunita was quite vague and offered little help in identifying its real location. However, after comparing von Ov's drawings with the structures recently discovered in the jungle, the research team was finally able to confirm the exact site of what was once known as the city of Lagunita. As they continued exploring the area, archaeologists uncovered many important features. In the central part of the city, there are large palace complexes, a pyramid temple standing nearly 66 feet tall, and 10 ancient stone stelae. Researchers also found 3 low circular stone altars and several relief carvings featuring the distinctive hieroglyphic writing of the Maya. One of the stelae particularly caught the attention of researchers. According to a preliminary translation by researcher Octavio Esparza Olguin from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, the inscription on this stone monument dates to November 29, 711 AD. However, the rest of the text, including the names of the ruling king and queen, has been heavily eroded by time and can no longer be clearly read. But the discoveries did not stop there. The archaeological team also identified another ancient city located near Lagunita. They named this site Tamchin, a Maya word meaning deep well. The name comes from a very distinctive feature of the city. researchers discovered about 30 underground water chambers dug deep into the ground to collect rainwater. One of these chambers reaches a depth of nearly 43 feet, an impressive achievement for ancient engineering. Like Lagunita, the center of Tamchen is also surrounded by large structures. Archaeologists identified a central courtyard with 3 temples positioned along its sides, along with a pyramid, a stone monument, and an ancient altar. These discoveries have raised many new questions about Maya civilization. According to Ivan Sprash, the 2 newly identified cities demonstrate the remarkable diversity of Maya culture and architecture. At the same time, they serve as a reminder that many archaeological sites may still be hidden within this vast jungle, waiting for the day when humans finally uncover them. 48-million-year-old fossil of a water-walking lizard that once roamed the earth. A lizard that can run across the surface of water without sinking. It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie, doesn't it? If you think so, you might be surprised to learn that creatures with this remarkable ability have actually existed in nature. Because of this unusual skill, scientists often refer to them by the intriguing nickname Jesus lizards, a reference to the story in the Bible about Jesus Christ walking on water. Recently, an extraordinary fossil discovery has helped scientists better understand the ancient origins of this unusual group of reptiles. The story begins in the state of Wyoming in the United States, where researchers discovered the fossil of a previously unknown species of lizard. The fossil has been dated to about 48 million years ago, during the second stage of the Paleogene period, a time when Earth was experiencing a warm climate often described as a giant greenhouse. The fossil was found in a well-known geological area called the Bridger Formation, which has long been recognized as a treasure trove of ancient life. At this site, scientists have excavated countless fossils of animals that lived tens of millions of years ago. But this time, the discovery was a lizard so unusual that it immediately drew significant attention from paleontologists. The new species has been given the scientific name Basiliscus alxi. According to researchers, this creature may represent one of the earliest known members of the lizard family Corytophanidae, also known as casca-headed lizards, species distinguished by a prominent bony crest on their heads that resembles a helmet. Details about this ancient lizard were published by researcher Jack Conrad, who described the discovery in the scientific journal PLOS One. According to Conrad, Basiliscus alxi may represent some of the earliest members of this lizard lineage in evolutionary history. In terms of size, the animal was not particularly large. Scientists estimate its body length to have been about 24 inches, roughly comparable to a medium-sized lizard today. However, what made it truly distinctive was its head. On top of its skull was a raised bony crest, somewhat like a small crown or ridge. Researchers believe this structure may have helped provide shade for the animal's eyes, giving its face a somewhat grumpy appearance, almost as if it always looked slightly angry. Beyond its unusual appearance, the diet of Basiliscus alxi was also quite varied. Its small teeth were well suited for catching and eating snakes, small lizards, fish, and insects. Scientists also believe that it may have occasionally eaten certain types of plants. Even more interesting, the relatively large cheekbone structure suggests that this creature may have been capable of handling prey larger than what many similar lizards typically eat. As for its habitat, the modern relatives of this group of lizards are mostly found today in warm, humid forests near the equator, ranging from southern Mexico to northern South America. Because of this, researchers believe that their ancient ancestors, including Basiliscus alxi, likely lived in similar environmental conditions. And this detail is what makes the discovery especially important. The fossil of this 48-million-year-old lizard not only helps scientists understand more about animal evolution, but also provides valuable data about Earth's climate during the greenhouse world that existed around 50 million years ago. At that time, global temperatures were significantly warmer than they are today, and tropical forests spread into regions where we would hardly expect to see them now. By comparing data from fossils like this with modern ecosystems, scientists can gain a clearer understanding of how living organisms adapted to climate change in the past. Looking at the bigger picture, discoveries like this do more than tell the story of a single ancient lizard species. They also help us see a much larger picture, how climate change has influenced life on Earth in the past, and how it may continue to affect living species today. And understanding that process is truly important for maintaining the balance of ecosystems on our planet. the 3,000-year-old shaman's tomb, and the mysterious power of the jaguar. High in the mountains of Peru, where ancient valleys once nurtured the mysterious civilizations of South America, archaeologists have discovered a tomb that has drawn significant attention from the research community. The discovery was made near the city of Cajamarca, within a well-known archaeological site called the Pacoampa Archaeological Complex. This site has been studied by scientists from Peru and Japan since 2005, because the area contains many traces of ancient communities that lived there thousands of years ago. During a recent excavation, researchers uncovered this remarkable tomb. Inside the tomb were the skeletal remains of a man who lived around 3,000 years ago. But what makes this burial unusual is not only its age, but also the strange burial objects placed alongside the deceased. From the very first signs, archaeologists suspected that the individual buried there was not an ordinary person. Several pieces of evidence suggest he may have been a shaman, or a figure with high spiritual status within the ancient community that once lived in this region. One of the most notable artifacts found in the tomb was a set of 3 ceramic seals. These seals were likely used to stamp designs onto the body, possibly during religious ceremonies or special rituals. Among them, the most striking seal bears the image of a jaguar, an animal that held deep symbolic meaning in many ancient cultures of the Americas. For many early societies in Central and South America, the jaguar was not merely a powerful wild animal. It was also seen as a symbol of strength, authority, and the ability to connect with the spiritual world. In some ancient cultures, the animal was even kept as a pet by members of the ruling elite. For that reason, the presence of a jaguar seal in this tomb has led scientists to believe that the man buried there may have been regarded as a special figure, someone believed to possess the ability to channel or connect with the power of this animal. The tomb contained more than just the seals. Researchers also found several finely decorated ceramic vessels. Around 3,000 years ago, objects like these were not commonly owned. They were considered valuable items and were usually associated with important rituals or with the burials of individuals from high social ranks. Another detail that adds to the mystery of the tomb is that the face of the skeleton was covered with a layer of red cinnabar. Cinnabar is a rare mineral, and according to researchers, its source may have come from the central highlands of the Andes Mountains. This suggests that the material may have been transported along long-distance trade routes, something typically accessible only to members of the upper class. This information was emphasized by Yuji Seki, an archaeologist from the National Museum of Ethnology, Japan, and co-director of the archaeological project at Pacoampa. According to him, the use of cinnabar in burial rituals is often associated with individuals who held special roles in ancient societies. Based on the artifacts discovered, many researchers believe this shaman may have been seen as someone capable of connecting with the spiritual power of the jaguar, the snake, and the bird, 3 animals that frequently appear in the spiritual symbolism of many ancient cultures in the Andean region. He may have served as a healer, a ritual specialist, or a mediator between humans and the world of the gods. People in the community likely came to him for advice, healing, or explanations for problems they could not understand. However, archaeologists have not yet conducted radiocarbon dating on the artifacts found in the tomb. The current estimate of 3,000 years is based on the style and design of the artifacts, which closely resemble objects from the same period previously discovered at the Pacoampa complex. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this discovery is that each artifact in the tomb acts like a small piece of history. When put together, they allow scientists to begin forming a picture of a man who lived 3 millennia ago, a mysterious shaman who may once have held great spiritual authority within his ancient community. Yet, as with many archaeological discoveries, the deeper researchers dig, the more they realize that countless secrets still lie hidden beneath the ancient soils of the Andes Mountains. The mysterious giant footprints in a 3,000-year-old temple. In the ancient lands of the Middle East, once the cradle of countless great civilizations in human history, there is a temple that leaves almost anyone who visits it in awe, not because of gigantic statues, and not because of treasures made of gold and silver, but because of an extremely strange detail carved directly into the stone floor of the temple. These are enormous footprints, so large that many people cannot help but wonder, could they have been made by some kind of giant creature? These mysterious footprints were discovered at the Mohenjo-daro Temple, an ancient temple located northwest of the city of Aleppo in the country of Syria. The discovery was first recorded in 1955, when archaeologists began excavating the ancient ruins of the site. The excavation at that time was led by Ali Abu Asaf, a researcher who spent many years studying the history of this remarkable temple. According to archaeological research, the Mohenjo-daro temple dates from approximately 1300 to 740 BC, meaning it existed during the Iron Age, an important era in the ancient history of the Middle East. Researchers believe the temple may have been built even earlier than the legendary Temple of Solomon described in the Bible. Looking at its overall structure, the Mohenjo-daro temple was designed with three main sections. The first is the entrance porch, where pilgrims or participants in religious ceremonies would enter. Next comes the antechamber, and finally the main hall, where the most sacred sanctuary of the temple was located. The entire structure was decorated with hundreds of intricate carvings depicting various figures, such as lions, angels, mythical creatures, mountain gods, and many complex geometric patterns. All of these details indicate that this site was once an important religious center in ancient times. But among all these works of art, the feature that captured researchers' attention the most lies directly on the stone floor. There are 4 enormous footprints, each measuring about 3.3 feet long, much larger than the footprint of an average human. The first 2 footprints are positioned side by side at the entrance porch of the temple. Ahead of them is another footprint, and the final footprint appears right at the entrance leading into the main hall. This arrangement makes it seem as though some giant being walked step by step into the temple. What makes the discovery even more intriguing is that the 2 footprints at the back include both a left and a right footprint, closely resembling human feet. The distance between these footprints is about 30 feet. If these truly represented the stride of a living creature, a single step would be almost as long as a bus. Because of this, some people have proposed a rather bold hypothesis. If a creature could take a step as long as 30 feet, its height might have reached around 65 feet. From there, stories about ancient giants began to emerge around the Mohenjo-daro temple. Of course, scientists remain cautious about such speculation. Many archaeologists believe that these footprints may simply be religious symbols carved into the stone floor to represent the presence of gods entering the temple. In many ancient cultures, carving the footprints of deities was a way to symbolize the sacred nature of a place of worship. But whether they are symbolic representations or a mythological story recorded in stone, the giant footprints at Mohenjo-daro continue to spark curiosity. Do they represent a god stepping into the temple? Or are they simply an artistic detail meant to impress pilgrims who came to worship there? Even today, the mystery of the giant footprints in this ancient temple still has no definitive answer. So what do you think? What is your answer? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss it together. The warship that lay beneath the sea for 500 years. The tragic mystery of the Mary Rose. Some ships are more than just vessels used for battle at sea. They become part of history itself, and when they sink into the ocean, their stories often seem to sink with them. Yet sometimes, after hundreds of years, the past unexpectedly rises back into the light. The story of the Mary Rose is one such case. Nearly 500 years ago, this ship was once the pride of the English Navy. It was built during the reign of Henry VIII, a king well known for his ambition to transform England into a powerful naval force. At that time, the Mary Rose was not simply a warship, it also symbolized the military strength of the United Kingdom during a turbulent period in European history. However, the history of this legendary ship ended in a deeply tragic way. On July 19, 1545, during a tense naval battle with the fleet of France, the Mary Rose suddenly met disaster just off the coast of the Isle of Wight. While the battle was underway and King Henry VIII himself was directing the attack from the shoreline, the massive ship suddenly tilted to one side and sank into the sea within just a few minutes. At that moment, more than 500 royal sailors and soldiers were on board. When the Mary Rose went down, most of them had no time to escape. According to historical records, only about 30 people survived, while hundreds of others perished along with the ship. It became one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in the history of the English Navy. After the disaster, the Mary Rose disappeared beneath the cold waters of the sea for centuries. The ship lay silently on the seafloor, gradually covered by layers of mud, sand, and time. Its story remained part of history, but the exact location of the wreck was lost for nearly 500 years. It was not until 1982 that a major archaeological project was launched to recover the legendary vessel. The work was carried out by the Mary Rose Trust with support from the Mary Rose Museum in the city of Portsmouth. This effort is considered one of the most complex and expensive underwater archaeological projects ever undertaken. After years of work on the ocean floor, archaeologists finally succeeded in raising part of the hull of the Mary Rose to the surface. But what surprised them even more was what they found inside the wreck. Thousands of ancient artifacts had been preserved beneath layers of seabed mud for centuries. Weapons, naval equipment, sailors' personal belongings, and even wooden fragments from the ship itself all helped recreate a vivid picture of the lives of sailors in the 16th century. Another remarkable discovery was around 9,000 pieces of human bone recovered during the excavation. Although not all of them could be precisely identified, the research of bioarchaeologist Anne Sterland helped reconstruct many of the skeletons in considerable detail. From these remains, scientists estimate that at least 179 people were on board the ship at the moment it sank. Further research, including ancient DNA analysis and studies of disease markers on the bones, has helped scientists learn more about the lives of these sailors. Researchers have discovered the kinds of illnesses they suffered from, what their diets were like, and the hardships they faced while living at sea during the Renaissance. The wreck also revealed fascinating stories about animals. Among the discoveries was the complete skeleton of a dog named Hatch, believed to have been similar to today's Jack Russell Terrier. The dog may have lived alongside the sailors on the ship before the tragedy occurred. In addition, traces of cod bones from the region of Newfoundland, along with preserved salted meats, were found. These small details show that the Mary Rose was once part of a global trade network that was beginning to form during that period. Today, the surviving hull of the ship has been carefully preserved and is displayed at the Mary Rose Museum in Portsmouth. Thousands of artifacts recovered from the ship are also exhibited there, helping visitors and researchers better understand the lives of sailors who lived nearly 500 years ago. If you ever have the chance to visit this museum, you will not simply see a reconstructed ancient ship. You will be standing in front of a real piece of history, where every plank of wood, every artifact, and every skeleton tells the story of a legendary ship and the people who lived, fought, and ultimately lost their lives in the ocean centuries ago. Dogu, Japan's oldest mystery. Have you ever wondered, before humans learned how to write and record history through language, what did they think about, what did they believe in, and how did they express those beliefs? What remains from the past, a broken pot, a fragment of bone, or a small clay figurine, may be the key that opens a door into the spiritual world of our ancestors. Among the most mysterious artifacts ever discovered are the dogu, small clay figurines created by prehistoric people in Japan that have remained an unsolved mystery for thousands of years. The word dogu literally means clay figure. These objects appeared toward the end of the Jomon period, a remarkably long era that lasted from about 14,000 BC to 300 BC. Over thousands of years, while the people of ancient Japan lived as hunters and gatherers and gradually transitioned into more settled communities with early forms of agriculture, they created these unusual figurines. Measuring only about 4 to 12 inches tall, dogu figures have human-like shapes. Many appear to represent women, with large circular eyes that look almost like goggles, narrow waists, wide hips, and sometimes even swollen, pregnant bellies. But what motivated people to shape these figures? We have very few clues that reveal the true purpose of dogu. Written language did not appear in Japan until around the 6th century AD, thousands of years after dogu had already disappeared from history. Because of this, modern explanations remain largely speculative and are based mainly on the figure's appearance and the archaeological contexts in which they were found. They may have been symbols of fertility, objects used in rituals for childbirth, or tools used by shamans in religious ceremonies. Some scholars even connect dogu with Neolithic mother goddess figurines such as the Venus of Willendorf, objects widely believed to symbolize fertility, life, and rebirth. Even more fascinating is the fact that dogu do not follow a single design. Instead, archaeologists generally classify them into 4 main styles: the pregnant woman type, the horned owl type, the slit-eye type, and the heart-shaped or crescent eyebrow type. Among these, the slit-eye type, known as shakoki dogu, is so distinctive that it has become the most recognizable image associated with dogu in Japan. The name shakoki means light-blocking device, because the large circular eyes resemble protective snow goggles traditionally used by the Inuit. The appearance of these figures is so unusual that some theories have even suggested that dogu might represent extraterrestrial beings. It may sound like a wild idea, but since we have no written records to confirm what is correct, many possibilities remain open to discussion. What makes dogu especially mysterious is not only their appearance, but also the way they are discovered. Very few dogu are found intact. Most are missing arms, legs, or heads, and in many cases, the breaks appear to have been made intentionally. This has led some researchers to wonder whether the figurines were deliberately broken as part of a ritual, perhaps a symbolic sacrifice once they had fulfilled their spiritual purpose. So what exactly are dogu? Are they representations of gods, protective charms for women, or simply toys from prehistoric times? We may never know the precise answer. Yet it is this very mystery that makes dogu such a vivid symbol of the past, where each small figurine is like a fragment of history hidden beneath layers of time. And every time archaeologists uncover another dogu, humanity moves one small step closer to answering an eternal question: who are we and where did we come from? The mystery of Mohenjo-daro, the Mound of the Dead. Mohenjo-daro, often called the Mound of the Dead, is one of the oldest and most mysterious cities ever known to humanity. It carries within it stories of great prosperity and a sudden disappearance that left almost no trace behind. And if you think history is nothing more than dry stories from the past, Mohenjo-daro might make you think again. Located in Sindh, Pakistan, Mohenjo-daro was once one of the largest centers of the ancient Indus Valley civilization. It was a magnificent city built around 2600 BC during the same era as the civilizations of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet surprisingly, humans did not discover the existence of the city until 1922. From that moment on, the mysteries surrounding Mohenjo-daro only became even more fascinating. So why is Mohenjo-daro called the Mound of the Dead? The answer is not simply because of its name, but because of the mysterious way the city disappeared. This was once a thriving urban center, home to an estimated 35,000 residents. The people there built an organized community with carefully planned streets and an advanced underground drainage system, something that even many modern cities still struggle to achieve today. And remember, all of this was accomplished more than 4,000 years ago. Of course, what makes Mohenjo-daro remarkable is not only its prosperity, but also its unique architecture. The structures here were built primarily from baked bricks, rather than stone as seen in many other ancient cities. This suggests that the people who lived here possessed architectural and technological knowledge far ahead of their time. They did not just construct sturdy buildings, they also paid attention to convenience and the long-term sustainability of their city. But what could have caused such a beautiful and advanced city to suddenly disappear? That question is exactly what archaeologists still cannot answer with certainty. For decades, researchers have searched for clues in ancient seals engraved with pictographic symbols and in the remains of everyday life left behind by the city's former inhabitants. Yet to this day, no widely accepted theory has been established to explain the collapse of Mohenjo-daro. Some believe that a natural disaster, such as earthquakes, massive flooding, or sudden climate change, may have caused the city to fade into oblivion. Others suggest that an invasion by another civilization might have completely destroyed it. Whatever the true cause may be, Mohenjo-daro continues to hold on to its mystery without a clear explanation. This is what makes it one of the most fascinating stories in human history, a story that inevitably comes to mind whenever we talk about ancient civilizations. By now, you are probably wondering what really happened to Mohenjo-daro. What was the true reason that caused this city to disappear? But the answer may take a very long time to uncover, because even today, this ancient site still hides so many secrets that even renowned scientists have struggled to fully explain. 2,000-year-old bread prison in Pompeii reveals a terrifying secret that shocked archaeologists. Hidden beneath the layers of ash from the ancient city of Pompeii, buried after the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, Archaeologists from Pompeii Archaeological Park recently stunned the research community when they excavated a little-noticed area known as Region 9, Insula 10, located near the slope of the ancient city. At first glance, the site looked no different from the countless ruined walls scattered throughout Pompeii. But according to the archaeologists, the deeper they dug, the more each layer of soil and stone began to reveal a story that would send chills down anyone's spine. Gradually, a strange ancient architectural complex emerged before their eyes. It consisted of small, cramped rooms connected to one another like a dark maze. These rooms had almost no windows facing the outside. On the walls, there were only a few tiny openings positioned high near the ceiling, and each of them was sealed with thick iron bars. The first impression of this structure did not resemble a house, nor did it look like an ordinary workshop. Instead, it looked more like a prison. Because of that, archaeologists became extremely curious about what this place had actually been used for. They began conducting detailed research and analysis. After many months of examining the architectural remains, labor tools, and traces of daily activity left behind, the archaeologists reached a shocking conclusion. This place had once been a bread prison, operating around AD 79, just before Pompeii was wiped out by the volcano. At this point, many people might wonder, why would bread making require a prison? That was exactly the same question everyone asked, even the archaeologists themselves at first. But the truth behind it was far more brutal than it initially appeared. Inside this complex, the rooms were extremely cramped, with low ceilings and only faint light filtering in through small openings. There were no signs of normal living conditions, no courtyard, no real living space, and no area meant for a proper daily life. This was a place where enslaved laborers were confined, people forced to work day and night grinding grain and producing bread for the city. What particularly caught the attention of archaeologists were the remains of large stone grinding mills that were still in place. These mills did not operate with machines like modern equipment. Instead, they had to be turned through continuous pulling force, and to do this, the ancient Romans used blindfolded donkeys. Just imagine the scene. Inside a dark room, donkeys had their eyes covered so they would not realize they were walking in an endless circle. They were forced to take heavy steps around the grinding mill for hours, sometimes day and night, crushing grain into flour. Beside them were enslaved workers, both men and women, living and working in the same suffocating space. They had to push the mills while also controlling the donkeys, occasionally whipping them to force them to keep moving. Just thinking about it is horrifying. But that was not the end of their work. The enslaved workers also had to constantly pour more grain into the mills, wait for the flour to be ground, then shovel it out and prepare the next batch. The cycle repeated endlessly, day after day, in an environment with almost no light, no freedom, and no hope. Even more disturbing, archaeological evidence suggests that humans and animals lived together in these same rooms. They slept there, worked there, and almost never stepped outside the world beyond those cold stone walls. Terrifying, isn't it? This discovery has opened an entirely new perspective on the society of ancient Rome. When people usually think about ancient Rome, they imagine magnificent arenas, monumental architecture, and a brilliant civilization. But hidden behind that glory was a brutal labor system, where people at the lowest levels of society were turned into tools to serve the needs of the city. And perhaps the most thought-provoking idea is this. When the volcanic disaster struck in AD 79, it is very possible that the people inside this bread prison were still turning the grinding mills as they did every day, completely unaware that history was about to freeze the final moments of their lives forever beneath the ashes of Pompeii. What do you think about this truth that has just been revealed? Do you find it cruel? Feel free to share your thoughts by leaving a comment below this video. 2,600-year-old tomb, containing rare treasures found completely intact. In the historic lands of Italy, a region that once served as the cradle of many brilliant civilizations throughout human history, archaeologists have recently made a discovery that has greatly excited the research community. The discovery began when they were conducting a survey at an archaeological site in central Italy. During the investigation, they unexpectedly uncovered a remarkable ancient tomb belonging to the mysterious civilization known as the Etruscan civilization. What makes this discovery so astonishing is not only its age, but also the fact that it has remained almost completely intact for more than 2 millennia. According to initial dating results, the tomb is about 2,600 years old, dating back to around the 7th century BC. At first glance, that may seem like just a number, but if you imagine the world at that time, many civilizations were still in their early stages of development. Yet in central Italy, the Etruscans had already built advanced communities with unique art, beliefs, and elaborate burial rituals. The newly discovered tomb clearly reflects that culture. Rather than being a simple burial pit, the entire structure was carved directly into rock. Even more interesting is that it was shaped to resemble a small house. When archaeologists entered the tomb, they realized that the interior space had been designed like a miniature living room where the deceased were laid to rest as if they were sleeping inside their own home. Inside the tomb, researchers discovered the skeletal remains of 4 individuals, carefully placed on finely carved stone beds. Preliminary studies suggest that these individuals included 2 men and 2 women, who were most likely members of the same family or lineage. The way their remains were arranged indicates that they were buried with respect and ceremonial care, reflecting the Etruscan belief in the afterlife. But the story does not end there. As archaeologists continued examining the surroundings, they gradually realized that the tomb resembled a forgotten historical treasure vault. Surrounding the 4 skeletons were more than 100 ancient artifacts, each with its own story to tell. Among these objects were finely crafted pottery, ancient weapons, bronze jewelry, and even silver hair accessories, items that had once been part of the everyday lives of the people buried there. Just by looking at the number and variety of these artifacts, researchers were able to imagine the social status of those buried in the tomb. They may have been quite important individuals within the Etruscan community of their time. What makes this discovery even more extraordinary is the rare condition in which the tomb was found. Over many decades of archaeological excavations in the region, experts have uncovered numerous tombs from the Etruscan civilization. However, most of them had already been looted by tomb robbers hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Valuable items had long since disappeared. This tomb, however, was completely different. It had remained sealed for thousands of years, almost untouched by both ancient and modern humans. Because of that, everything inside remained nearly in its original position, almost exactly as it was when the last Etruscans closed the tomb. According to archaeologist Davide Zori from Baylor University in the state of Texas, United States, an intact Etruscan tomb like this is extremely rare in archaeology. The reason is that such preservation allows scientists to observe the entire Etruscan burial ritual almost exactly as it originally occurred, without major disturbance from time. Of course, the research has only just begun. In the coming months, scientists will continue conducting detailed analyses of the skeletal remains. Through these studies, they hope to learn more about the individuals' ages, diets, diseases, and possibly even the causes of their deaths. When we talk about the Etruscans, we are referring to a civilization that once flourished in central Italy many centuries before the rise of the Roman civilization. Around the 6th century BC, this civilization reached the height of its prosperity. However, as history unfolded, a series of wars with the Romans gradually weakened them. Eventually, by the 1st century BC, all Etruscan territories had been officially absorbed into the Roman state. Yet even though their civilization disappeared long ago, tombs like this one have quietly remained beneath the earth, waiting for the day they would be opened, so they could finally tell the story of a civilization that was once magnificent, yet still filled with mystery in the history of humanity. 500 ancient Egyptian tombs reveal a surprising truth about the origins of the pharaoh religion. For many years, people believed that the religion centered on the worship of the kings of ancient Egypt, often called the pharaoh religion, was created and shaped by the power of the kings and influential priests. However, when researchers began digging deeper into ancient cemeteries located along the banks of the Nile River, the real story began to unfold in a completely different direction. According to a study published in the scientific Journal of Archaeological Method and Theory, an international team of scientists conducted a survey of more than 500 ancient tombs at the Adaima Cemetery, an ancient burial site located in the Nile Valley. And it was precisely at this place, which seemed at first to be nothing more than the cemetery of ordinary rural communities, that they discovered clues about the true origins of the pharaoh religion. It may sound surprising, but the research results suggest that religious beliefs once thought to originate from kings actually grew out of the very simple burial customs of ordinary people. This idea directly contradicts the long-standing belief that ancient Egyptian religion was imposed from the ruling class down onto the population. Just think about it. For thousands of years, pharaohs were considered almost divine figures. They were not merely kings, they were seen as the bridge between humans and the world of the gods, the holders of sacred authority over both heaven and earth. Because of this, many scholars once assumed that Egypt's complex religious rituals must have been created by powerful elites. That would seem like the obvious explanation. Yet the tombs at Adaima tell a different story. This cemetery was used from around 3300 BC to 2700 BC, long before pharaohs ruled Egypt and even before the giant pyramids appeared in the desert. That means the burial rituals practiced there may have formed when Egyptian society still consisted mainly of early agricultural communities. Under the leadership of archaeologist Ameline Alcouf from University of Toulouse, the research team discovered that many of the tombs in this cemetery were arranged according to remarkably precise astronomical patterns. This suggests that ancient Egyptians possessed an impressive knowledge of the sky from a very early time. One of the most striking discoveries is Tomb S166. Inside it were the remains of a young woman buried with an extremely unusual ritual. Her left arm had been ceremonially removed and placed across her chest. Not only that, but the tomb itself was positioned precisely in alignment with the sunset on the winter solstice. Even more astonishing, her coffin was aligned with Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which the ancient Egyptians viewed as a sign announcing the annual flooding of the Nile. The discoveries did not stop there. Two other tombs also revealed unusual connections with the sky. One of them, Tomb S837, contained the remains of a woman buried with delicate jewelry and a broken ceramic vessel, suggesting symbolic burial rituals. Another, Tomb S874, held the body of another woman buried with a staff and a fiber wig. The position of this tomb was arranged according to the summer solstice. Researchers refer to these special tombs as cultural ignition points. After these tombs were constructed, many other graves gradually appeared around them, as if the local people regarded them as sacred locations. Over time, these burial places may have evolved into early forms of shrines, influencing the rituals and beliefs of the wider community. What becomes even more fascinating as research continues is that many core elements of later Egyptian religion, funerary rituals, astronomical beliefs, and the idea of a connection between humans and the cosmos appear to trace their origins back to these very early folk traditions. So far, scientists have identified more than 900 tombs within the Adaima cemetery, spread across an area of over 74 acres. This makes it one of the oldest and most extensively studied burial complexes in the history of ancient Egypt. And perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this discovery is the realization that what was once considered the sacred power of kings may actually have begun with the simple beliefs of farmers living along the Nile thousands of years ago. It is a story that reminds us that history is not always written from the heights of power. Sometimes it begins within the most ordinary communities. Fascinating, isn't it? The remains of a pregnant woman in an ancient Egyptian tomb reveal a 3,700-year-old tragedy. In the ancient town of Kam Ombo in southern Egypt, experts from the Supreme Council of Antiquities recently announced a remarkable discovery: the skeletal remains of a pregnant woman dating back about 3,700 years. This discovery was not the result of a random excavation. Instead, it was part of a collaborative archaeological project involving researchers from Italy and the United States. At the time, the archaeological team was surveying an ancient cemetery located near desert routes in southern Egypt. During their work, they came across a small tomb lying quietly beneath the ground. At first, no one expected that it contained a story that would provoke such deep reflection. According to preliminary research, this cemetery had been used between 1750 BC and 1550 BC. It served as a burial ground for people who once lived in or traveled through the vast deserts of ancient Egypt, especially traders and travelers passing through the region. When the tomb was opened, archaeologists discovered the remains of a young woman. After analyzing the bones, they estimated that she died at around 25 years old. But what immediately caught everyone's attention was one extraordinary detail. Inside her body were the skeletal remains of a fetus. Just imagine that. For nearly 4 millennia, the mother and her unborn child had remained together in the same tomb, as if time had frozen the final moment of their lives. What does this detail suggest? To answer that question, scientists began conducting careful examinations and analyses. They discovered that the fetus was positioned with its head pointing toward the mother's pelvis. This is a position commonly seen in babies during the final 3 months of pregnancy, when the body is preparing for birth. Because of this detail, experts proposed the hypothesis that the woman may have died shortly before giving birth or during labor. Her body had been wrapped in a burial shroud made of leather, a form of burial that was fairly common in certain ancient Egyptian communities during that period. Beside the mother were 2 ceramic vessels, which may once have contained food, water, or items meant to accompany her on the journey to the afterlife, according to ancient Egyptian beliefs. Although the tomb itself was quite simple, the discovery carries significant scientific importance. According to researchers, the remains of pregnant women are extremely rare in ancient archaeology. Because of this, each discovery like this helps scientists better understand the lives and the dangers that women faced in ancient times. Among those commenting on the discovery was Sandra Wheeler from the University of Central Florida. She explained that finding the remains of a woman who died during pregnancy is exceptionally rare. This discovery highlights how childbirth in the ancient world often involved great risks and how the danger of dying during childbirth was something many women had to face. Unfortunately, over time, the soft tissues of the body have not survived. This has made it difficult for scientists to determine the exact cause of the young mother's death. However, the position of the fetus alone has already provided an important clue about what may have happened during the final moments of her life. Because of that, this discovery is more than just another ancient tomb. It is like a vivid fragment of history, reminding us that behind the Great Pyramids and the stories of powerful kings in ancient Egypt, there were also countless ordinary people with their own lives, hopes, and personal tragedies. And sometimes, a single small tomb resting quietly beneath the sand for nearly 3,700 years is enough to tell a story powerful enough to make the whole world pause and listen. The real face of a 2,500-year-old Egyptian princess mummy that shocked experts. Did you know that among the thousands of artifacts preserved in museums around the world, there are sometimes objects that seem to have slept quietly for thousands of years, until one day modern science suddenly awakens their stories? This time, that story begins with an ancient coffin displayed at the Perth Museum in the city of Perth, Scotland. Inside the coffin are the remains of a woman who lived about 2,500 years ago, a person who once existed in the magnificent yet mysterious world of ancient Egypt. For many decades, this coffin was simply regarded as an ordinary archaeological artifact in the museum's collection. People only knew that it contained the mummy of a woman, but what her real face looked like, where she came from, or what kind of life she lived, all of those questions remained unanswered. That changed recently when scientists decided to apply modern research technologies to study the mummy more closely. Only then did the identity of this mysterious woman begin to emerge. One of the specialists involved in this unique project was Chris Rinn, a well-known expert in craniofacial anthropology and forensic science. Using X-ray imaging, skull structure analysis, and anatomical data, he and his colleagues began the process of reconstructing a 3D model of the ancient woman's face. In simple terms, they were trying to answer a question many people might also be curious about. What did a woman who lived 2.5 millennia ago actually look like? As the skull analysis progressed, scientists noticed a very interesting detail. The shape of this woman's skull did not match the typical skull structure of ancient Egyptians, often referred to as the Kemetic people. Normally, Kemetic skulls are long and narrow, with a prominent nasal bridge and a relatively elongated face. However, the skull structure of the woman in the coffin displayed noticeably different characteristics. After completing the facial reconstruction, the research team proposed a rather surprising hypothesis. The woman might not have been native Egyptian. Instead, she may have come from the kingdom of Kush, an ancient kingdom that once existed in the region of present-day Sudan. According to the analysis, she may have been a Kushite woman with dark skin, belonging to a civilization that maintained close ties with ancient Egypt. The kingdom of Kush was once one of the major powers of the ancient world. At certain times, it even controlled parts of Upper Egypt, expanding its influence across many regions along the Nile River. This means that cultural interaction between Egypt and Kush took place for many centuries. The story of this mysterious woman became even clearer when researchers decoded the hieroglyphs carved on the coffin. The ancient inscriptions suggest that her name may have been Takar HB, or Takarheb. Based on the symbols and burial rituals, experts believe she may have held a fairly high status in society, possibly even a princess or a priestess. Scientists estimate that Takarheb died at around 30 years old. However, an unexpected detail was discovered during an examination of the mummy's teeth. Before her death, she had suffered from severe tooth decay. This detail shows that even individuals of high status in ancient societies faced health problems similar to those we experience today. Researchers believe that Takarheb lived sometime between the 25th and 26th dynasties of Egypt, roughly between 760 BC and 525 BC. This was a particularly fascinating period in history when Kushite kings ruled Egypt for a time. But the story does not end there. The journey of the coffin containing this mummy is also quite remarkable. It is believed that the coffin was discovered in the late 19th century, after which it was sold from Cairo to a businessman and civil servant living in the town of Aloha. The coffin was most likely found in Akhmim, a location that was once a popular stop for European travelers journeying along the Nile during the 19th century. Around 1892, the coffin was brought to Aloha. Then in 1936, it was donated to the Perth Museum, where it remains preserved to this day. And now, after more than 2,500 years, modern technology has finally brought the face of the woman who once lived along the Nile back to life. A face that tells not only the story of her own life, but also opens the door to a much larger story about the cultural connections between ancient civilizations that once flourished in our world. 7 hastily buried skeletons of Roman soldiers revealed after 1,700 years. Sometimes, great archaeological discoveries do not begin with grand expeditions or gigantic pyramids. Instead, they appear in places that seem completely ordinary. This time, the story begins in the city of Osijek in Croatia, where workers were simply building a new library for the local university. While construction equipment was digging deep into the ground at the university library site, the workers suddenly uncovered something that brought the entire construction area to a halt. It was not a treasure of gold and silver, nor sparkling ancient artifacts, but old pits in the soil containing a dark story from nearly 2,000 years ago. Experts were quickly called to the scene to investigate. At first, the pits appeared to be nothing more than old holes in the ground, but as researchers began excavating more carefully, they discovered something unsettling. The pits had once been reused as a mass grave. Inside were the skeletal remains of 7 men, stacked on top of one another, as if they had been buried hurriedly after some tragic event. Scientists immediately carried out biological anthropological analyses of the skeletons. The results showed that all of them were adult males. Among them, 4 were young adults between 18 and 35 years old, while 3 were middle-aged men between 36 and 50 years old. One detail that caught the researchers' attention was their average height, about 5 feet 8 inches. That might seem ordinary today, but in the ancient region of Pannonia, this height was considered relatively tall compared to most men of that era. However, what made this discovery truly dramatic was not their age or physical stature, but the evidence of violence preserved in their bones. When specialists carefully examined the skulls, especially the frontal bone, they noticed that all 7 skeletons bore signs of powerful blows from blunt weapons. These injuries did not appear to be accidental. Instead, they showed the typical patterns of face-to-face confrontations, such as those occurring during battle or during an execution. At this point, a major question emerged. Who were these men, and what had happened to them? To find the answer, scientists used a range of modern techniques. They conducted radiocarbon dating, physical anthropological studies, stable isotope analysis of the bones, and even extracted ancient DNA. Piece by piece, the data began to form a historical picture that had been buried for centuries. The final conclusion, produced by an international research team, made the discovery even more shocking than initially expected. According to the scientists, these 7 men were very likely soldiers of the Roman Empire. Their deaths may have been directly connected to a battle or possibly a mass execution that took place around AD 260. At that time, the powerful empire was far from peaceful. It was entering a turbulent era known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. During this period, emperors were frequently overthrown, wars broke out across many regions, borders were invaded, and military rebellions occurred almost constantly. Near present-day Osijek once stood an important Roman military location where fierce conflicts likely took place. In such chaotic circumstances, the deaths of these 7 men may have been just a small fragment of a much larger battle, or perhaps the grim outcome of an internal military purge. Imagine their final moments, soldiers facing their attackers, or perhaps forced to kneel before fatal blows were delivered. Afterward, their bodies were buried quickly in old pits, without tombstones, without ceremony, and then forgotten by history for nearly 2 millennia. Only when a modern library was about to rise in the middle of the city did their story finally return to the light. Mysterious and chilling, don't you think? Sometimes an archaeological discovery is not just a few bones beneath the ground. It is a doorway into the most dramatic moments of human history. And those 7 skeletons lying quietly beneath the soil of Croatia are a reminder that the past has never truly been asleep. Don't you think so? 600-year-old fortress, hiding ancient military secrets in the Gobi Desert. In the vast golden sands of the Gobi Desert in China, where scorching winds sting the face and the horizon stretches endlessly, there stands an ancient structure that leaves anyone who sees it in awe. Not because of towering height or extravagant luxury, but because of its unusually strange shape. When viewed from above, the entire complex looks remarkably like a giant turtle lying quietly in the middle of the desert. This structure is known as Yongtai Fortress, a historic fortress built during the time of the Ming Dynasty, which ruled China from 1368 to 1644. Located in Gansu Province in northwestern China, the fortress has long been known by a special nickname, the Turtle Fortress or Turtle City. Just imagine it. In the middle of the endless sands of the Gobi Desert, an ancient fortified city built in the shape of a creature that symbolizes endurance and longevity. The idea alone makes many people curious. Why would people in the past design a fortress shaped like a turtle? Fortunately, the answer is not too difficult to understand. According to experts, the design reflects both military strategy and cultural symbolism. Yongtai Fortress was built as a strategic defensive structure to protect the border region from incursions by nomadic groups from the north. During the feudal era, this region served as a critical defensive line, so military engineers designed the fortress with an extremely strong structure. The entire complex includes 12 cannon platforms positioned along the city walls, ready to defend against attacks from multiple directions. In addition, there are 4 large gate towers, located on the 4 sides of the fortress. These served both as entrances and as strategic observation points. Surrounding the entire stronghold was also a deep moat, forming a natural defensive barrier that made it more difficult for enemies to approach. And that was not all. Yongtai's defensive system was further extended by a network of beacon towers stretching dozens of miles to both the north and south. In ancient times, a single smoke signal or flash of fire from these towers could quickly transmit warnings across great distances, alerting soldiers stationed in more remote areas. Because of this close integration of architecture and defensive strategy, Yongtai Fortress is considered one of the representative examples of Chinese military engineering during the feudal period. However, what truly makes this place unique is its shape. According to Li Chongren, a conservationist who has worked with the fortress for more than 10 years, when viewed from above, the 4 gate towers resemble the 4 legs of a turtle. The narrow streets, alleys, and rows of houses inside the fortress are arranged in patterns that resemble the markings on a turtle's shell. Together, the entire layout forms the image of a giant creature resting in the desert, both unique and symbolic, representing endurance, protection, and longevity. In the past, the fortress was not only a military base, but also a living community. Historical records show that about 800 households, with nearly 2,000 residents, once lived here, forming a lively small town in the middle of the harsh desert landscape. But time and nature are often harsher than people expect. After hundreds of years, the dry climate of the Gobi Desert and its powerful sandstorms have caused many of the ancient walls to deteriorate, with cracks gradually appearing in the structure. Life here also became increasingly difficult due to prolonged droughts and severe weather conditions. As a result, many families eventually moved away in search of better places to live. From a community of thousands, today only 78 households remain living within the old fortress walls. Even so, the story of Yongtai Fortress is far from over. Recognizing the unique historical and architectural value of the site, local authorities and conservation experts are now working to strengthen restoration and preservation efforts. Wall by wall and gate by gate, the fortress is being reinforced to resist the damage caused by time. because in the vast sea of sand in the Gobi Desert, this turtle city is not just an ancient fortress, it is also a witness to more than 600 years of history, telling the story of military ingenuity, frontier life, and the resilience of people facing the harsh forces of nature. 400-year-old vampire cemetery in Poland is forcing historians to rethink the past. Did you know that in ancient Europe, stories about vampires were not just tales told for entertainment around a nighttime fire? For many communities, they were once a very real fear. People believed that if proper precautions were not taken, the dead might rise from their graves and bring disaster to the living. Because of this belief, folklore in Poland often mentions unusual cemeteries, places where individuals suspected of being vampires were buried according to frightening rituals meant to prevent them from returning. This story has once again captured the attention of archaeologists after researchers began excavating a strange site near the old village of Pien in northern Poland. The area clearly resembled a cemetery, yet it did not appear in any historical records. There were no old maps, no church documents, and no indication that it had ever been officially recognized as a burial ground. After many years of excavation, archaeologists gradually discovered about 100 graves scattered across the site. Most of them were extremely simple, even poor in appearance, leading researchers to believe that this may have once been a burial place for poor villagers or individuals who had been marginalized by society. But a recent discovery has made the cemetery far more unsettling than anyone originally imagined. While digging into a grave that was almost completely intact, archaeologists uncovered the skeletal remains of a child between 5 and 7 years old. What shocked them was not the child's age, but the highly unusual burial position. The child's body had been buried face down, rather than lying on its back as in most traditional burial rituals. Even more strangely, a large padlock had been carefully placed at the feet of the skeleton. Hearing this, many people might ask the same question the archaeologists asked at the time: why would there be a lock in a grave? It turns out this was not the first time such an object had been discovered. Earlier excavations at the same cemetery had uncovered 2 other padlocks. However, those earlier finds were not clearly associated with complete skeletons or were not placed in obvious positions, leaving scientists confused about their purpose. Only after the discovery of the child's grave did the mystery begin to make sense. Analysis showed that the child died about 400 years ago, and the combination of the face-down burial position and the lock placed at the feet led archaeologists to conclude that this was very likely a vampire grave. In traditional folklore across many parts of Europe, burying someone face down was believed to prevent them from returning from the dead. People once believed that if someone suspected of being a vampire tried to rise from the grave, being buried face down would cause them to dig deeper into the earth rather than climb back to the surface. In other parts of Europe, archaeologists have even discovered more disturbing anti-vampire practices. These included driving wooden stakes through bodies or placing skulls beneath the feet, methods intended to ensure that the dead could never come back to life. Returning to the cemetery in Pien, another detail caught the scientists' attention. The burial site was not located on consecrated church land, which was very common for medieval cemeteries. This strengthens the theory that many of the individuals buried here may have been feared or rejected by their communities. Among the roughly 100 graves, many were extremely modest and likely belonged to people who were too poor to afford traditional burial ceremonies. However, the cemetery was not reserved only for the poor. Last year, archaeologists also discovered the remains of a wealthy woman at the site. During excavation, they found a golden sickle placed across her neck, clothing embroidered with gold thread. An analysis revealed that before her death, she had consumed a type of medicine containing gold, a treatment that only the upper class could afford at the time. Yet despite her wealth, the woman was still buried according to a vampire prevention ritual. And that reveals something powerful about the past. Sometimes the most frightening thing in history is not monsters or supernatural creatures, but the harsh customs that people once imposed on one another because of fear and deeply rooted beliefs. 4,000-year-old lipstick jar emerges from the soil of Iran, a beauty treasure of an ancient Middle Eastern woman. In the ancient lands of the Middle East, where many brilliant civilizations once flourished, history is sometimes revealed not through grand palaces or ancient weapons, but through small familiar objects. This time, what has amazed archaeologists is an ancient lipstick container discovered in the city of Jiroft in southeastern Iran. When people hear the word lipstick, they usually think of it as a simple beauty product used by women today. But this particular jar is very different. Researchers call it a treasure, because what scientists discovered during their analysis has forced historians to reconsider the history of ancient cosmetics. The story began in 2001, when a massive flood along the Halil River swept across the region surrounding Giroft. The powerful floodwaters washed away layers of soil that had covered several ancient cemeteries dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. As the soil was stripped away, numerous artifacts that had been buried for thousands of years were suddenly exposed. Among the burial objects brought close to the surface was a small but extremely delicate jar. Based on its shape and where it was found, researchers believe it may once have been placed in the tomb of an ancient Middle Eastern woman. Unfortunately, once these artifacts were exposed, many looters quickly stole a number of valuable items. Fortunately, archaeologists managed to secure this remarkable jar before it disappeared from history. It took decades of study for scientists to fully understand the true value of this small object. Dating results revealed that the lipstick jar is nearly 4,000 years old, possibly dating back to around 1936 BC. At that time, many civilizations around the world were still in their early stages of development. Yet in this region, people had already learned how to create sophisticated cosmetic products, an astonishing achievement. Even more surprising to researchers was the fact that the lipstick itself still survived inside the container after thousands of years. Its color has remained a vivid reddish-orange, with sparkling particles that give it a shimmering appearance. When scientists analyzed the composition, they discovered that the cosmetic mixture was made from hematite, a red iron oxide mineral known for its bright color. The mineral had been finely ground and then mixed with other materials such as manganite and braunite to produce the final shade. But that was not all. The ancient formula also included finely crushed quartz particles, which created a glittering effect when light hit the surface. In addition, researchers detected traces of plant fibers, which may have been added to give the lipstick a subtle fragrance. Interestingly, the shimmering reddish-orange shade of this ancient lipstick happens to match one of the popular color trends in modern beauty today. In other words, after thousands of years, human taste in beauty sometimes returns to the very styles our ancestors once loved. Not only the cosmetic itself, but the container is also a remarkable piece of craftsmanship. It was carved from smooth green chlorite stone, shaped to imitate containers traditionally made from local marsh reeds, a design style that was common in everyday life in this region during ancient times. Although archaeologists have not yet identified the exact tomb where the lipstick jar originally belonged, historical sources suggest that cosmetics were extremely important to women in ancient Iran. The 1,350-year-old Ice Child tomb reveals a truth that chilled archaeologists. In the quiet village of Matzes, a place that once stood at the crossroads of several ancient European cultures, archaeologists were carefully digging through thick layers of soil tangled with old tree roots when they suddenly struck something unusually hard. At first, only a few stone slabs appeared, but the deeper they dug, the more they realized this was no ordinary structure. Gradually, an ancient stone tomb emerged before their eyes, built so solidly that even after lying underground for more than 1,350 years, it remained almost perfectly intact. And when the lid of the tomb was finally opened, the scene inside caused everyone present to fall silent for several seconds. Lying in the center of the tomb was the body of a small child. Based on dental analysis and bone structure, researchers determined that the child was only about 18 months old. But what astonished the research team was not only the age of the burial, it was the objects placed beside the child. Right next to the small body was a sword decorated with delicate gold inlays, something that in ancient societies was usually reserved for warriors or members of the highest noble class. Doesn't that seem strange? A child not even 2 years old yet buried with a symbol of power and honor. The child's body had been carefully laid on a piece of animal fur. The small figure was wrapped in a cloak and adorned with several items that suggested high social status. The clothing itself puzzled scientists for a long time. The child was dressed in a long-sleeved linen tunic, trousers, and leather shoes. And most remarkable of all, the trim of the garment was woven with silk, an extremely rare and valuable fabric at that time. What makes this detail even more fascinating is that the silk was not produced locally. Instead, it likely arrived through long-distance trade routes connected to the ancient Byzantine Empire. This strongly suggests that the child's family held significant wealth and influence within their society. Yet the mystery deepened even further when experts began analyzing the tomb itself. This was not a simple burial pit. The tomb had been constructed with thick stone walls, precisely shaped stone slabs, and the entire structure had been sealed with a strong layer of lime mortar. In other words, it resembled a structure specifically designed to resist the destruction of time, and remarkably, it succeeded. After more than a millennium, nearly everything inside had been preserved in astonishing condition. Thanks in part to the cold climate of Central Europe, materials that normally decay quickly, such as textile fibers, animal fur, and even some organic tissues, had survived. Because of this rare preservation, archaeologists were able to observe almost the entire burial arrangement exactly as it had been prepared more than 1,000 years ago, something that rarely happens with ancient graves. But the more details researchers uncovered, the more questions began to appear. Why would a child be buried with a gold-adorned sword, a clear symbol of a warrior? Could this have been a symbolic coming-of-age ritual, honoring the child as an heir who never lived long enough to grow up? Or perhaps it was a tragic death that led the family to hold a special ceremony to honor the child's memory. It might even represent a unique way in which ancient society commemorated a young member of a royal lineage. Perhaps the most puzzling aspect for researchers is how completely different this tomb is compared to other burials from the same era. Most medieval children's graves were simple and modest, yet this tomb was constructed with the care and complexity normally reserved for someone extremely important. So who was this mysterious ice child? A young prince? The heir to a powerful family? Or the central figure of an ancient ritual that history has long since forgotten? If you had been standing in front of that tomb on the day it was opened, what do you think was really hidden behind that golden sword lying beside a child only 18 months old? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss it together. The mysterious 6,000-year-old tunnel beneath a moat in Germany. Did you know that some archaeological discoveries begin with the most ordinary projects? Not with a grand expedition, and not with a hunt for ancient treasure. Sometimes everything starts with a modern construction site. And this strange story is no different. When engineers were preparing to build a wind turbine in the region of Rheinstedt, they had no idea that beneath the seemingly ordinary soil lay a secret that had been hidden for thousands of years. The story began during the preliminary surveys before construction. At that time, archaeologists from the State Office for Heritage Management and Archaeology of Saxony-Anhalt were called to the site to conduct an emergency excavation. At first, they assumed it would be a routine inspection like many others. But as soon as the first layer of soil was removed, the specialists began noticing unusual signs. Beneath the ground appeared the remains of an ancient trapezoid-shaped moat, carefully dug and built with a surprisingly complex structure. As the excavation continued deeper, archaeologists realized that this structure dated back to an extremely distant past. Initial analysis suggested that it was connected to the Balberga culture, a society from the late Neolithic period that existed in central Germany between 4000 and 3150 BC. That means the site dates back nearly 6,000 years. That number alone is enough to spark the curiosity of anyone who loves history. But the most surprising discovery had not yet appeared. While continuing to examine the bottom of the moat, experts discovered a small opening that led downward into the earth. At first, it looked like a natural cavity in the soil. However, once it was carefully cleared, the team realized that it was actually the entrance to an ancient tunnel. The entrance was narrow and discreet, almost completely hidden. Yet as researchers moved deeper inside, the space gradually widened, revealing that this was not a random formation. Just imagine it for a moment. Thousands of years ago, in the middle of a moated area, prehistoric people secretly dug a tunnel like this. But for what purpose? At first, even the archaeologists themselves had no clear answer. However, when they began examining what remained inside the tunnel, the ancient story slowly started to take shape. Inside, the experts discovered an ancient altar, several fragments of pottery, a horseshoe, along with the skeleton of a fox and bones from several other small mammals. At the bottom of the tunnel, they also found a layer of charcoal, evidence that fires had once been lit there. These findings led researchers to propose several different theories. Some experts believe the tunnel may have been a place for secret ritual ceremonies, where ancient people offered sacrifices to the spiritual forces they worshipped. The animal bones and the altar could be remnants of ancient sacrificial rituals. Others suggest a different possibility. The tunnel might once have been used as a place to store important belongings, or even as a safe shelter during times of conflict between ancient communities. With its narrow entrance and its location within a moat, the structure may have been designed to conceal people from outside threats. For now, however, these ideas remain only theories. One thing is certain: this tunnel was not created by chance. It was the result of human intelligence and effort thousands of years ago. So think about it for a moment. If you had lived during that time, how would you have used a secret tunnel hidden deep beneath a moat? Would it have been a sacred place for ancient rituals, or a final refuge when danger arrived? Personally, I think it may have been some kind of shelter. But the real answer may still lie somewhere beneath the ancient soil of Reinstedt, patiently waiting to be discovered one day. Ancient ritual ceramic jar in Ciutetelco reveals a lost mystery from 1,400 years ago. In the mountainous region of the Sierra Nororiental, within the Mexican state of Puebla, there is an archaeological site with a rather unusual name, Ciutetelco. At first glance, the place appears to be nothing more than a quiet stretch of land covered with vegetation and the subtle marks of time. Yet few people realize that beneath this seemingly ordinary soil lie stories from an ancient era, long before Europeans ever set foot in the Americas. Recently, a small but remarkable discovery has drawn the attention of archaeologists. During an excavation carried out by the National Institute of Anthropology and History, researchers uncovered an important pre-Columbian archaeological feature at Ciutetelco. As the soil was carefully removed layer by layer, traces of ancient structures slowly began to appear. Then, among fragments of pottery and architectural remains, a special artifact gradually emerged. It was a spherical ceramic jar, small enough to be comfortably held in two hands, with a diameter of about 12 inches. At first glance, it might seem like just another ordinary piece of ancient pottery, but the more closely experts examined it, the more they realized this vessel was far from simple. Its evenly rounded shape and finely crafted body suggest that it was made by highly skilled potters of the ancient world. According to initial analyses, the jar dates back to the late Classic period of Mesoamerica, roughly between AD 600 and AD 900. In other words, this small artifact has existed for more than 1,400 years, a span of time almost impossible to imagine. However, what interested archaeologists the most was not the jar's age, but its possible purpose. According to a statement from the National Institute of Anthropology and History, ceramic vessels with similar shapes were often used in ancient funeral rituals. In many pre-Columbian cultures, such jars were sometimes associated with the burial of infants. This possibility immediately raised several questions for researchers. Could this jar have once been used in a burial ceremony? And if so, what story lies behind it? Interestingly, the vessel was not discovered alone. It was found very close to the architectural remains of a large platform, which may once have served as the center of an ancient ceremonial complex. This discovery suggests that Ciutetelco may have been an important ritual site in the region during ancient times. Unfortunately, the jar itself is now in a very fragile condition. After centuries buried underground, it is cracked and broken into many small fragments. Because of this, archaeologists had to use an extremely careful method during the excavation. Instead of separating the fragments at the site, they decided to remove the entire artifact together with the surrounding block of soil. This technique helps protect the fragile ceramic pieces from further damage during transportation. Once removed from the excavation area, the soil block containing the jar will be transported to the Ciutetelco Community Museum. There, specialists will conduct detailed studies, including reconstructing the jar's original shape and analyzing the materials used to create it. These investigations may help scientists better understand how ancient people in this region performed their ritual ceremonies, as well as the true role that Ciutetelco played within the broader pre-Columbian cultural landscape. Hopefully, in the near future, archaeologists will be able to piece together all the newly discovered fragments and continue telling a story that history has kept hidden for more than 1,400 years. Until then, let's wait together and see what secrets the past may reveal next. The tomb with gold nails in the coffin, an accidental discovery, reveals a historical general. Some archaeological discoveries begin with carefully planned excavations. But other stories start completely by accident, sometimes with just a few strikes of a worker's shovel. And it was exactly such a moment that led to the discovery of an ancient treasure-filled tomb, where even the nails used in the coffin were made of solid gold, a detail so rare that it left archaeologists stunned. The story began when a reservoir construction project was underway in Xinpu County, located in Guizhou. At first, this was simply a routine water management project. Day after day, workers continued digging and leveling the ground just as they would at any other construction site. But during the excavation, they suddenly noticed signs of an unusual structure buried beneath the thick soil, something that resembled an ancient tomb. Sensing that the discovery might be important, the workers quickly reported it to the local authorities. Soon after, archaeologists arrived at the site to conduct a proper investigation. To be honest, at the early stage, the experts did not have particularly high expectations. Small ancient graves are often discovered during construction projects, and many of them turn out to have limited archaeological value. However, those initial assumptions were soon overturned. As the excavation continued and layers of soil were gradually removed, the team discovered a coffin buried deep underground. Once the surrounding dirt had been carefully cleared away, the archaeologists began examining it more closely. Most of the wood from the coffin had already decayed after centuries underground. But at that moment, a surprising detail caught everyone's attention. On the surface of the coffin, the nails were still intact, and they were not made of iron or bronze as usually expected. Each one shimmered with a golden glow. Yes, the nails were made of pure gold. In ancient times, gold was an extremely valuable metal. It was typically used for jewelry, royal items, or ritual objects. Yet here, gold had been used simply to fasten a coffin together. This seemingly small detail immediately told archaeologists something important. The person buried in this tomb could not have been an ordinary individual. As the excavation continued deeper, the discoveries became even more astonishing. Throughout the burial chamber, numerous valuable artifacts slowly emerged from the soil. Gold objects, silver items, jade pieces scattered throughout the space. Among them, one of the most striking objects was a gilded silver basin intricately engraved with the image of two fish. The basin measured more than 24 inches in diameter, an exceptionally large size for an ancient artifact. And that was not all. Once the full structure of the tomb had been uncovered, experts realized that its scale was far larger than they had originally expected. The burial chamber was spacious, and the grave goods were so numerous that they nearly filled the entire interior. Every artifact was finely crafted and incredibly valuable, clearly indicating the extremely high status of the person buried there. But the most important clue was yet to come. Among the many treasures discovered, archaeologists found a silver lampstand that stood out from the rest. Unlike the other items, this one had inscriptions carved into its surface. Those words would eventually become the key to solving the mystery of the tomb. After careful study and comparison with historical records, experts were finally able to determine the identity of the tomb's owner. The person buried inside was Yang Jia, a well-known general in history who once commanded troops along the frontier and achieved numerous victories in battles against the Mongols. Because of his remarkable military achievements, he was highly respected by the emperor during his lifetime and received many honors. And when he passed away, he was laid to rest in a luxurious tomb that reflected both his rank and his reputation. It's fascinating to think that from a completely accidental discovery by construction workers digging in the ground, an entire historical story from centuries ago was brought back into the light. An ancient tomb glittering golden nails, and behind it all, the legacy of a general who once shaped history along the frontier. Quite an incredible story, isn't it? The skeletons of children wearing warrior belts in a 2,500-year-old cemetery in Italy. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an old construction site, a place that had once been an abandoned tobacco factory. Everything seemed ordinary: dirt and rocks, aging brick walls, and layers of dust left behind by time. But deep beneath that ground lay a story from nearly 2,500 years ago. And no, this isn't a tale from a science fiction movie. It is a real story, one that left archaeologists thinking for a long time before they could begin to understand its meaning. The story begins in the town of Pontecagnano, located in the Campania region of southwestern Italy. During a recent archaeological excavation at the site of the old tobacco factory, researchers uncovered an ancient cemetery buried deep underground. Among dozens of graves that were excavated, one in particular immediately caught everyone's attention. Inside that grave were the skeletal remains of two children between the ages of 5 and 10. According to experts, they were buried nearly 2,500 years ago, around the 4th century BC. However, what fascinated researchers the most was not simply the children's age, but the objects buried with them. Among the grave goods were large bronze belts. At first, that may not sound especially unusual, but for archaeologists, this detail was extremely surprising. These belts are typically found only in the graves of adult men belonging to the pre-Roman Samnite culture, usually individuals of high status or members of the warrior class. So why would two small children be buried with items normally associated with grown men? That question immediately prompted experts to take a closer look at the entire cemetery. As it turned out, the grave of the two children was only part of a much larger burial site containing 34 tombs, dating from the 4th to the 3rd century BC. What surprised researchers even more was that nearly half of the graves contained the remains of children between the ages of 2 and 10. In fact, archaeological excavations in Pontecagnano actually began back in the early 1960s. Over decades of research, archaeologists have discovered more than 10,000 graves spread across 3 separate ancient cemeteries in the area. These burial grounds date from the 9th century BC to the 3rd century BC, representing hundreds of years of history hidden beneath the soil. According to researchers, this region was first settled by people of the Villanovan culture around the 9th century BC. They were known for introducing highly advanced bronze working techniques to southern Italy, which explains why so many of the metal artifacts discovered here are so finely crafted. Returning to the unusual grave of the two children, archaeologists soon realized that this was not the first time they had encountered children buried with bronze belts in this region. Previously, they had uncovered the remains of a 12-year-old child who had also been buried with a similar belt. Archaeologist Gina Tomei told the press in 2021 that this discovery was extremely significant. According to her, the 12-year-old boy lived around the 4th century BC, and besides the bronze belt, he was also buried with ceramic drinking cups. These items may have been placed in the grave to ensure that the child would have food and wine in the afterlife, a belief commonly found in many ancient cultures. Yet the biggest question still remains unanswered. Why were these children buried with belts meant for adults? Some researchers have proposed an interesting theory. They compared these burials with graves from Anglo-Saxon culture in the United Kingdom during the 6th century. In many of those cases, young boys were buried with belts and warrior equipment, even though they were far too young to fight. The meaning behind this ritual may not have been about the child's past, but about their future. Perhaps these objects symbolized what the child was meant to become if they had grown up. A warrior, a protector of the community. At least that's what I think. But what about you? What do you think? "42 mysterious skeletons discovered beneath a 500-year-old hospital in Peru." Right in the heart of the historic capital city of Lima, there stands a building that has existed for nearly half a millennium. People walk past it every day and probably see it as nothing more than an old historic structure. But few realize that beneath the ground below this site lies a secret that has drawn the special attention of archaeologists. That secret was revealed during an excavation at Hospital San Andres. Here, researchers discovered an ancient cemetery buried deep underground. What surprised them the most was that within a relatively small area, they uncovered 42 skeletons dating back to the 16th century. Just hearing that number alone is enough to spark curiosity, isn't it? In fact, Hospital San Andres is far from an ordinary place. It is one of the oldest buildings in Lima, constructed in 1552 during the time of Andrés Hurtado de Mendoza, who served as a representative of Spanish colonial authority in the region. Over the centuries, the hospital has witnessed countless events in the city, from epidemics and wars to the many social changes of an entire era. Yet even the people who originally built the hospital likely never imagined that one day the soil beneath it would reveal such a large ancient cemetery. According to the lead archaeologist Luis Martín Bogdanovich, the newly discovered site may actually be the oldest and best preserved cemetery ever found in Lima. Initial records suggest that this burial ground was used continuously from 1552 until 1808, meaning it remained active for more than 250 years. As archaeologists carefully removed layer after layer of soil, the skeletons gradually appeared. In total, 42 sets of human remains were uncovered, buried only about 12 inches below the surface. What is particularly remarkable is that many of the skeletons remain surprisingly well preserved, despite having been underground for centuries. Preliminary analysis indicates that the individuals buried here included both men and women, most of whom died between the ages of 30 and 50. Some of the male skeletons even show evidence of diseases that once affected people during that historical period, including syphilis, as well as certain cranial deformities. These details provide researchers with valuable insights into the health conditions and living standards of people during the Spanish colonial period. But the story does not end there. Alongside the skeletons, the archaeological team also discovered various ancient artifacts scattered throughout the burial area. These included small crosses, ceramic vessels, and several objects associated with the religious and cultural traditions of that time. Such items suggest that this cemetery was not used by only one group of people. Instead, it may have served as the final resting place for individuals from different social classes, from ordinary citizens to people of higher status. And this discovery has led archaeologists to an extremely intriguing hypothesis. Some experts believe the cemetery might somehow be connected to the burial place of the final rulers of the Inca Empire. After the Spanish conquest of the region in the 16th century, historical records indicate that the mummies of several Inca kings were moved or hidden in secret locations. To this day, the true resting places of some Inca rulers remain unknown. Because of that, the discovery of 42 skeletons beneath this ancient hospital has generated enormous excitement within the archaeological community. If this hypothesis turns out to be correct, it is possible that somewhere within this ancient cemetery there are still undiscovered graves, and perhaps one of them could even belong to the rulers of an empire that once dominated the entire Andes Mountains. For this reason, scientists are now planning to continue excavating deeper in the area. Who knows? During the next round of digging, they might not only uncover a few more skeletons, but also reveal a missing piece of history from a legendary empire that has been lost for centuries. And if that happens, wouldn't that be incredible? For now, let's wait and see what the next discoveries will reveal. The remains of a child inside a 3,800-year-old jar in Israel. Some archaeological discoveries astonish people because of gold, silver, and precious treasures, but others leave people quietly reflecting because of the deeply human story behind them. The discovery in the ancient city of Jaffa in Israel is one such story. During a recent archaeological excavation, researchers uncovered an ancient ceramic jar buried deep beneath the ground. At first glance, it did not look very different from many other ancient jars that have been found at archaeological sites. However, when experts carefully opened the jar, what they saw inside caused everyone to freeze in shock. Inside the jar were the skeletal remains of a child. What makes this discovery even more remarkable is the age of the jar itself. Archaeologists estimate that it is about 3,800 years old, meaning it dates back to a very distant period in history, when many ancient civilizations in the Middle East were still in their early stages of development. According to researchers, Jaffa is one of the oldest cities in the region. People have lived there continuously for around 4,000 years. Over the course of thousands of years, this area served as an important trading hub where different cultures met and left their marks. Because of this, nearly every time archaeologists dig into the ground beneath the city, they uncover new traces of history. One of the archaeologists directly involved in the discovery of this unusual jar was Yoav Arbel from the Israel Antiquities Authority. According to him, finding the remains of a child inside a jar like this is not something commonly encountered in archaeology. What puzzles scientists the most is why ancient people chose to bury the child in such a unique way. Think about it for a moment. Why not place the child in a regular grave, but instead inside a ceramic jar? To answer that question, researchers have proposed an interesting hypothesis. Some scientists believe that ancient people may have viewed the bodies of young children as extremely fragile and vulnerable. Because of this, they might have wanted to protect the child after death, shielding the body from the pressure of soil and the surrounding environment. And the ceramic jar itself may have carried a deeper symbolic meaning. According to Yoav Arbel, ancient people may have seen the jar as a symbol of the mother's womb. By placing the child inside the jar and burying it in the ground, they might have believed that the child was still being protected and embraced, just as it once was inside the mother's body. In other words, this burial practice may have been a way for ancient people to express love and protection for a small life that had left the world far too soon. Of course, this is still only a scientific hypothesis. Researchers say they need more time and additional evidence to fully understand why this unusual burial ritual existed. However, what is certain is that this discovery offers a fascinating new perspective on how ancient people faced death, especially the death of children. Before the jar containing the child's remains was discovered, archaeologists in Jaffa had already uncovered many other remarkable artifacts. In ancient burial pits, they found ceramic fragments dating back more than 2,000 years, along with dozens of ancient coins from the Hellenistic period. These small objects may seem insignificant, but they are actually crucial clues that help scientists reconstruct how people lived thousands of years ago, how they traded, how they organized their daily lives, and even how they honored those who had passed away. And as you can see, sometimes a single small ceramic jar lying quietly beneath the ground for nearly 4 millennia is enough to tell a long story about history, culture, and the emotions of people who lived in the ancient world. Isn't that fascinating? "115 16th century skeletons with coins in their mouths found beneath a highway." You know, sometimes history isn't just written in books. Sometimes it lies right beneath our feet, waiting quietly for centuries. All it takes is a construction machine digging through a few layers of soil, and suddenly a story from hundreds of years ago emerges into the light. And that is exactly what happened in the Podkarpacki voivodeship of Poland, where a modern transportation project unexpectedly uncovered an ancient secret. The discovery occurred while workers were constructing the S19 expressway near the village of Jeżowie in the town of Nisko, Poland. During the construction work, the crew suddenly noticed unusual signs beneath the soil. At first, it was only a few fragments of bone appearing among the dirt and rocks, but the deeper they dug, the clearer it became that this was not an ordinary find. Construction was immediately halted, and archaeologists were called to the site. As the excavation began, skeleton after skeleton slowly emerged from the ground. By the time the dig was completed, the final number surprised everyone: 115 skeletons buried beneath the earth. Yet what caught the experts' attention the most was not only the large number of remains. According to the initial survey, about 70 to 80% of the skeletons belonged to children. A cemetery where most of the buried individuals were children, this detail alone gave many researchers pause. It raised the possibility that the community may have experienced a major epidemic or some tragic event that caused many young lives to be lost during the same period. Based on the condition of the bones and the burial layers in the soil, experts determined that the remains date back to the 16th century, roughly 500 years ago. However, when archaeologists examined the skeletons more closely, they discovered an even more unusual detail. Inside the mouths of some of the skeletons, ancient coins had been placed. Imagine the scene for a moment. An old cemetery, skeletons resting silently for centuries, and inside their mouths, small coins still remain. Why would ancient people do such a thing? Archaeologists say this was not random at all. In fact, it relates to a very old burial tradition in European history known as the obol of the dead. According to this ancient custom, before a person was buried, family members would place a coin inside the deceased's mouth. This coin was often called Charon's obol. The tradition originated from Charon in Greek mythology. In the legend, the souls of the dead must cross a river in order to enter the afterlife. The ferryman who carries them across that river is Charon, the boatman of the underworld. But in order to cross, the soul must pay a fee. Because of this belief, the living placed a coin in the mouth of the deceased as payment, so the soul could give it to Charon and continue its journey to the next world. Interestingly, this custom dates back to pre-Christian times, yet it survived for centuries within European culture. In fact, records show that the practice was still observed in some places as late as the 19th century during the time of Pope Pius IX. Returning to the ancient cemetery in Podkarpacki voivodeship, archaeologists noticed something else important. The individuals buried there had not simply been thrown into a chaotic mass grave. Instead, they had been carefully buried. All of the skeletons were laid on their backs, with their arms resting straight along their sides, a fairly formal and respectful burial position. However, aside from the coins placed in the mouths of some individuals, archaeologists did not find any other grave goods. There were no pieces of jewelry, no personal belongings, and no signs of wealth. Because of this, experts believe that the people buried in this cemetery may have belonged to the poorer social classes of that time. Two male skeletons holding hands for 1,600 years in an ancient tomb in Italy. In 2009, during an archaeological excavation in Italy, experts discovered a particularly unusual ancient grave. At first, they assumed it was just another routine archaeological find, similar to many other ancient tombs uncovered over the years. However, when the final layer of soil was cleared away, the scene that appeared before them caused everyone at the site to pause in silence for several seconds. Inside the grave were two skeletons lying side by side. What surprised everyone most was that their hands were tightly clasped together. At first glance, this position brought to mind the familiar image of married couples or lovers buried together in many ancient graves discovered around the world. But the story quickly became far more mysterious as researchers began studying the two skeletons more closely. Because of the burial conditions and the long passage of time, the preservation of both skeletons was quite poor. Many bones had been severely damaged, making it extremely difficult at first to determine their identity and gender. Archaeologists had to conduct a wide range of analyses, from examining bone structures and studying skeletal morphology to performing more complex scientific tests. The investigation took several years because even a small mistake could lead to an incorrect conclusion. Finally, after a careful and lengthy research process, the results were announced. Both skeletons belonged to men who lived around the 4th century AD. This finding immediately attracted special attention from the archaeological community. Until then, discovering two male skeletons buried while holding hands was something that had almost never been recorded in archaeological history. Naturally, this made the story of the ancient tomb even more mysterious. So who were these two men? And why were they buried in such an intimate position? To this day, there is still no definitive answer. Some experts have proposed a fairly reasonable hypothesis. The two men may have been brothers or cousins within the same family. In many ancient cultures, burying relatives beside one another was not unusual. Another theory suggests that they might have been soldiers who fought and died together on the battlefield. If that were the case, burying them side by side and even positioning their hands together could have been a way for people of that time to honor their camaraderie and deep bond. There is also a more controversial theory that has sparked considerable debate. Some researchers believe the two men may have been a same-sex couple in ancient society and that they were buried in a way that reflected their special relationship. Regardless of which theory might be correct, the discovery continues to make many people reflect. Because sometimes, a small detail, like two hands still clasped together after thousands of years, is enough to tell a story that history itself has forgotten. Around 1,600 years ago, these two individuals were laid to rest in the same grave, their hands still holding each other, as if trying to send a message to the future. Sadly, time has carried away almost all the answers. And that is exactly what makes this story so fascinating. Because in archaeology, what remains is not only bones or artifacts, but also the mysteries that continue to inspire modern people to search for the truth. 1,000-year-old banquet inside a tomb, a meal prepared for the afterlife. Since ancient times, building a tomb was never a careless task for ancient people. To them, death was not the end, but simply a doorway to another world. Because of this belief, the arrangement of objects inside a tomb was always prepared with great care. People in the past believed that whatever was placed beside them in death would accompany them into the afterlife. For that reason, many high-ranking officials and members of the aristocracy were often buried with numerous grave goods, from jewelry, pottery, and weapons to everyday household items. Some individuals even prepared a complete meal for themselves after death. It may sound unbelievable, but that is exactly what archaeologists witnessed when they excavated a famous ancient tomb in Zhangjiakou, located in Hebei province of China. The tomb is believed to be the final resting place of a historical figure named Zheng Wenxi. The moment the ancient tomb door was opened, After being buried underground for thousands of years, the archaeologists could hardly believe what they were seeing. Right before them, within the quiet space of the tomb, appeared a very unusual sight that looked exactly like a banquet table. This was not an imaginary scene, but an actual dining setup carefully arranged. On the table were bowls and plates neatly placed, almost as if their owner had stepped away only a short time ago. What surprised the experts even more was that wine bottles were placed beside the dishes. Of course, after thousands of years, the wine inside had completely evaporated, leaving only the empty bottles behind. Yet the fact that the bottles were still positioned exactly where they had been placed told archaeologists that this arrangement was far from random. But the story did not end there. As researchers examined the ancient banquet area more closely, they discovered several additional fascinating artifacts. Among them was a beautiful white porcelain plate, delicately decorated with elegant black branch-like patterns. What caught everyone's attention was that a few raisins were still resting on the plate. Yes, those raisins had remained inside the tomb for thousands of years. Just imagining the scene is remarkable enough. An ancient banquet table with dishes, wine, and fruit lying quietly underground for millennia, almost as if it were still waiting for someone to return and enjoy the meal. For archaeologists, this discovery is not simply an intriguing sight. It also carries significant scientific value. Through the objects found on this banquet table, scientists have gained valuable information about the history of grape cultivation and winemaking in ancient society. Furthermore, the way the table was arranged reflects the beliefs and mindset of people in that era. It is very possible that Zheng Wenci prepared this meal with the hope that, after entering the next world, he could continue to enjoy life in his own way. This reveals an interesting philosophy of life among ancient people. They did not necessarily view death with fear, but rather as the beginning of a new journey. Because the tomb was prepared with such careful attention to detail, modern researchers are now able to better understand the lives, culture, and beliefs of people who lived thousands of years ago. From the bowls and plates to the few raisins that remained behind, every item has become a precious piece of the historical puzzle. And that is exactly what makes archaeology so fascinating. Every new discovery is like a doorway opening into the past, helping us better understand the people, cultures, and daily lives of our ancestors who lived thousands of years ago. Ancient tombs, forgotten cities, and mysterious artifacts are quietly telling the stories of history. And who knows? Right now, there may still be countless secrets buried deep beneath the ground, waiting for humanity to uncover them. So, which archaeological discovery makes you the most curious? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to give ancient history a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next fascinating discoveries. For now, goodbye and see you in the next video.